How's it going, everybody? Too Spooky here. And today is the day I finally bring you the long-awaited and highly anticipated new One Piece Top 10. I'm extremely sorry that this video here took so long to come out. In my previous One Piece Top 10, I did say this video wouldn't be coming out for quite a while, but when I said quite a while, what I actually meant was like 1 or 2 months tops. Now, here I am releasing this video 4 months later. So I'm incredibly sorry that this video took so long to come out, but hopefully this video will end up being worth the wait. So with that, today, we're going to be counting down the top 10 strongest characters in One Piece. Now, there are a ton of things we are going to cover in this list, and that means there are also a lot of things you guys should keep in mind before we actually jump into it. The first thing you need to know is that my pronunciation is god-awful, so I will more than likely mispronounce multiple names or phrases. The second thing you need to know is that this list will be based on how strong these characters are overall. So what we're going to be doing is we are going to be looking at their physical abilities, their ability to use haki and how effective their haki is, their intelligence, their notable connections or alliances with other characters and organizations, their devil fruit abilities if they have a devil fruit, and a few other random aspects as well. Because personally, I believe each of these characteristics are very important in deciding which of these characters are indeed the strongest in One Piece. The third thing you need to know is that there are so many strong characters in One Piece. So many, in fact, that condensing all of these powerful characters into a single top 10 list would be near impossible for me to do. So to make it easier on myself, I've created a list of conditions that a character needs to meet to be eligible to be on this list in the first place. And these conditions are as follows. The first is that these characters need to be currently alive in the story. So characters such as Whitebeard, Goldie Roger, and Ace will not be on this list. The second is that these characters need to be in their prime or very close to it. So characters such as Rayleigh, Sengoku, and Garp will not be on this list as well. And the final condition is that we need to know a decent amount of information about these characters and their abilities. So characters we know little to nothing about can't be on this list, simply because we don't have enough information to truly confirm they are one of the strongest. Now, I can say without a doubt that a character such as Monkey D. Dragon is a very powerful character in the One Piece world, but we know very little about him, and as of right now, we know nothing about his abilities. So although I believe Dragon would be one of the 10 strongest One Piece characters, we just simply don't know enough about him or his abilities to place him on this list accurately. So instead of making a fool of myself, I decided it's best to just keep him off the list entirely. However, also keep in mind that there will be a few exceptions to this rule on the list. So in regards to this condition, characters such as Monkey D. Dragon, the Gorosei, Basil Hawkins, Yaruj, and X Drake will not be on this list. And the final thing you need to know about before we get into the list is that the way I will be formatting this top 10 is by starting each character off with a detailed description about everything you need to know about the character in question, and then giving my personal analysis on the information I just relayed to you. So there will be a few instances where I sound like I'm repeating myself. Also, we will be covering a lot of information for each character, so be prepared for a lot of knowledge being thrown your way. But of course, we won't be covering everything, just the things I think are most important in determining how powerful these characters really are. And finally, now that you know what to expect, let's begin. Number 10, Monkey D. Luffy. I'm sure most of you are fully aware of Luffy's abilities because he is the main character after all. But for the sake of keeping this list somewhat professional, I'm going to be going over all of his notable qualities anyway. And I want to say sorry in advance because we are going to be covering a lot of information about Luffy. So now might be the time to go grab some snacks. So the very first thing we are going to go over is his physical abilities without the use of his devil fruit. Considering that Luffy is the main character of the series, it is no surprise to hear that he has an enormous amount of physical strength, to the point where he can easily lift and shatter large boulders, push buildings apart, and shatter steel easily with his hands. Additionally, he can easily flip over and throw big men who are over twice the size of himself. And Luffy himself has also said that due to his training with his grandfather Garp as a kid, he has been able to throw a punch as powerful as a pistol round since he was 7 years old. Which, if that's as strong as his fists were then, I can't even begin to think of what we could compare them to now. Luffy also has incredible speed to the point where he can easily easily anticipate his enemies' movements and in turn counter their attacks. And even though Luffy's normal speed is nothing special on its own, it is multiplied greatly with the use of his Gear Second technique, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Luffy also has amazing durability and endurance, being able to endure a ton of powerful attacks from his enemies and still continue to fight. Some of the attacks he's endured would easily kill a normal person. And of course a lot of this is due to the help he gets from being a rubber man, but for instance he is able to take on these same deadly attacks while they are imbued with haki that bypass his devil fruit powers, and yet he can still get back up to fight. The best example of Luffy's endurance would be his fight with Cracker, where Luffy fought him for 11 hours straight, using techniques such as Gear Fourth that really eat up his energy. And he was still able to defeat Cracker by a small margin. But it doesn't even stop there. Luffy was also able to withstand attacks from Sanji shortly after his fierce battle with Cracker. And then shortly after this encounter with Sanji, Luffy managed to defeat most of Big Mom's army that went after him before he was finally taken down, which is absolutely insane. Another unique ability Luffy has developed is his immunity to poison, due to Luffy surviving the poison from Magellan's Doku Doku no Mi. Because of this, there has currently not been a poison shown to affect Luffy very much at all. Next, let's talk about Luffy's intelligence, or should I say, lack of. Don't get me wrong, Luffy isn't stupid by any means, but he is also by no means one of the smarter characters in the series, and he is without a doubt one of, if not the least intelligent character that will be featured on this list. Luffy has a very broad imagination and is very creative, especially with his devil fruit. He has great social skills, which is great for making new friends and recruiting allies even if he doesn't mean to. And he's very good at achieving the impossible, simply because he can easily think of a way to achieve these tasks. However, usually Luffy tends to think of the worst possible way to go about it, which in turn causes a ton of problems and destruction for anyone involved, and often gets himself and his crew into some pretty detrimental situations, so intelligence isn't really one of his strong suits. Luffy also has a very strong sense of willpower, but we'll talk more about that in a second. When it comes to haki, Luffy is one of the more prominent users currently. The main reason for this is because Luffy is one of the few characters that can utilize all three types of haki. He is also currently one of the only 6 living characters that can use Conqueror's Haki, at least from what is revealed so far. The simple way of explaining what exactly Conqueror's Haki does is that the user basically exerts their willpower onto individuals who have weak wills to render them unconscious, although individuals who have a stronger sense of willpower will remain unaffected. And because Luffy has one of the most prominent senses of willpower in the series, his Conqueror's Haki is almost unmatched. For instance, during his battle with the new Fishman pirates, he used his Conqueror's Haki to take out 50,000 men at once. Just try and comprehend how many people that actually is. Luffy can also utilize Observation Haki, which allows the user to sense the presence of others even if they are very far away. This in turn allows the user to mindlessly predict an opponent's movements moments before they make them, allowing Luffy to easily dodge attacks before they strike and even dodge a bullet at point blank range, allowing Luffy to have a great advantage against his opponents unless they have an unpredictable fighting style. And finally, Luffy can also use Armament Haki, and he's very proficient with it too. Basically, what Armament Haki consists of is an individual uses their spirit life force to create an invisible armor around themselves or specific parts of the user's body. It of course can not only be used as a means of defense, but also as a weapon because the armor is just so strong. Luffy's use of Armament Haki greatly strengthens his normal attacks, but also strengthens the techniques created from his Devil Fruit along with creating some new ones. Although we'll cover his Devil Fruit abilities in a minute, Luffy would not be able to use his Red Hawk technique without Armament Haki, because somehow between Gear Second and his Haki, Luffy found a way to ignite this attack to create both fire and an explosion. Along with that, without the use of Haki, Luffy would not be able to access his technique Gear Fourth. So bottom line, Luffy's Haki is something you definitely don't want to mess with, even if the person up against him is also a prominent Haki user. Next up, let's talk about Luffy's Devil Fruit, which is the Gomu Gomu no Mi, otherwise known as the Gum Gum Fruit, which gives Luffy's body the property of rubber, making him a rubber man. This fruit allows Luffy to stretch any part of his body like rubber. And because Luffy is a rubber man, this makes him immune to pretty much all blunt attacks. including but not limited to cannonballs and bullets, blunt objects, hand-to-hand combat, falls from very high places, and with the addition of his armament haki, this defense is even harder to bypass. However, if his opponent were to use armament haki against Luffy when he himself isn't using it to defend himself, they can bypass his immunity for a direct hit. Although Luffy is immune to blunt attacks, he is weak to slashing attacks such as swords. This fruit is also the natural weakness of the Goro Goro no Mi, being able to attack this specific electric Logia user without the use of haki, and is completely immune to the electrical attacks, making the Gomu Gomu no Mi far superior. One of Luffy's best characteristics would be his creativity when it comes to his devil fruit, and through this creativity he has created a ton of techniques. I won't be going through all of them just because there are so many, but I will be going over the most notable or recognizable. It should also be noted that a lot of these techniques would only be useful at close range, but because Luffy is able to stretch his body and limbs, these attacks can also easily become mid to long range attacks. So no matter where you are, you won't be able to escape Luffy's attacks. Luffy's signature technique is the Gum Gum Pistol, allowing him to deliver a very powerful punch as strong as a pistol. The Gum Gum Rocket, which is Luffy's main method of traveling great distances quickly by grabbing onto an object, stretching his arm back, and flinging himself away kind of like a slingshot. The Gum Gum Bazooka, where Luffy stretches both of his arms back a decent distance before propelling both of these arms into his opponents, with palms open to send them flying with great force. The Gum Gum Gatling, where Luffy sends out a massive barrage of constant powerful punches from seemingly every direction all at once. The Gum Gum Rifle, where Luffy twists his arm while he stretches it, and once his arm stretches forward and makes contact with the enemy, his arm untwists to create more force, along with allowing Luffy to perform this attack quicker than others, because the twisting of his arm also means Luffy doesn't need to stretch it back as far as other techniques. The Gum Gum Balloon, where Luffy inflates himself like a balloon to further soften blunt attacks, or to even return projectiles back at enemies such as cannonballs. This technique can also be used for a number of different scenarios. And the Gum Gum Bell, where Luffy stretches his neck back a considerable distance before flinging it back to create a devastating headbutt. Each of these techniques are very powerful and useful by themselves, but Luffy can also imbue them with armament haki to create an even more devastating attack. Now that we know a bit about Luffy's normal techniques, let's look at each of his gear techniques. The first one, or should I say second, is called Gear Second. This technique allows Luffy to speed up the blood flow in his entire body or select limbs, which provide them with more oxygen and nutrients. Providing more blood flow allows Luffy to become temporarily much faster and a little bit stronger, as long as the technique is active. However, this technique does take a toll on Luffy's body, essentially shortening his life bit by bit the more he uses it. So because of that, it does have a big drawback. Although after the time skip, I imagine Luffy has managed to perfect this technique to the point where it affects his body less or doesn't affect him at all. Because Gear Second allows Luffy to be both faster and stronger, it opens Luffy to a whole new plethora of techniques. These techniques are strengthened with both speed and a little bit of strength, giving them the new addition of Jet in their name. So a lot of the techniques we just discussed in conjunction with Gear Second are known as Jet Pistol, Jet Bazooka, Jet Gatling, and so on. Additionally, Luffy can also add armament haki to his techniques while in Gear Second, making for even more powerful attacks. And with the addition of this haki, Luffy also gains access to a new range of abilities involving fire. Somehow with the steam Gear Second produces, Luffy is able to ignite his limbs so long as they are coated in armament haki. That way he doesn't get burned. These techniques are known as Gum Gum Red Hawk, which is a flaming, much more powerful version of the Gum Gum Jet Pistol. The Gum Gum Hawk Gatling, which is a stronger flaming version of Gum Gum Jet Gatling. The Gum Gum Hawk Rifle, which is a stronger flaming version of the Gum Gum Jet Rifle. And the Gum Gum Eagle Bazooka, which is a flaming, stronger version of the Gum Gum Jet Bazooka. And that pretty much does it for Gear Second, so let's move on to the next one, which is Gear Third. This technique consists of Luffy biting a small opening into his thumb joint, and then blowing air into that opening to inflate specific parts of his body. When one or more of his limbs are inflated, they are so big that they resemble the size of a giant's limb. which because his limbs are so big, it ends up increasing the mass of that specific area on his body, which creates a larger area to attack with, including the addition of far greater strength. And there's a possibility you might think this sounds a bit similar to his Gum Gum Balloon technique, but the difference is with Gum Gum Balloon, Luffy is just sucking in a bunch of air which expands his body or his lungs until he exhales, whereas Gear 3rd instead blows this air directly into his bones, which even though they can stretch, they still maintain the strong nature of the bones themselves. And although this attack is very powerful, it does have a downfall, which is mobility. So Luffy generally only uses it when he needs raw strength opposed to speed. But it's not as bad as it sounds, because after the time skip, Luffy has managed to direct or select where the air is kept in his limbs. So now Luffy can still stretch his arms while they are inflated and maneuver them much better than he could before the time skip. As you probably already know, Gear 3rd opens up Luffy to a whole new range of abilities. Or, much like Gear 2nd, some big improvements to his regular techniques. Emphasis on big. Such as the Gum Gum Giant Pistol, which is basically the regular Gum Gum pistol except with a gigantic fist flying at you instead. The Gum Gum Giant Bazooka, which is basically the regular Gum Gum Bazooka except, you know, much bigger. I think you guys get the idea what the rest are like, because they're all just gigantic versions of his normal techniques. Luffy also has the capability of mixing Gear 2nd with Gear 3rd to create the Gum Gum Giant Jet Shell, which is where he inflates his body with Gear 3rd while keeping up his Gear 2nd to ram his whole body into his opponent with both immense strength and speed in the shape of a cannonball. Now, although this technique is very powerful, it is also rather dangerous because it puts double the strain on Luffy's body and restricts his movements. So if he fails to land this technique, it could very well be game over for him. In addition to that, Luffy can also enhance his Gear 3rd techniques with armament haki to create some extremely powerful techniques. A few examples of these techniques are the Gum Gum Elephant Gun, which is a haki-imbued version of the Gum Gum Giant Pistol. The Gum Gum Elephant Gatling, which is the haki-imbued Gear 3rd version of the regular Gum Gum Gatling. And the Gum Gum Grizzly Magnum, which is essentially the Gum Gum Giant Bazooka imbued with haki, and each of these techniques are definitely some of Luffy's most powerful, so they should not be taken lightly. And that pretty much wraps it up for Gear 3rd, so let's look at his currently last gear, Gear 4th. This technique currently has two different forms, which are Bound Man and Tank Man, but we'll talk about Bound Man first. So to activate this technique, Luffy first covers his arm with armament haki and then blows air into it. However, instead of inflating his bones like with Gear 3rd, he instead inflates his muscles and then inflates the rest of his body as well. Similar to how Gear 2nd constantly emits steam from Luffy's body, this form does as well. And because of that, Luffy is incapable of standing still and needs to constantly bounce. While in this form, Luffy's strength and speed are increased drastically, and in a way it utilizes both Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd into one massive powerhouse. Because you see, what Gear 2nd lacks is strength, and what Gear 3rd lacks is speed. So when Luffy mixes the two to create Gear 4th, he is almost unstoppable, because he is both insanely fast and insanely strong. Also, Gear 4th gives Luffy amazing defensive capabilities, because even though his body is hardened with haki, he still remains rubbery, which allows attacks to bounce right off of him. So now Luffy can even counteract his weakness of sharp objects with this technique because his body is hard enough to stop it from piercing him. And yet he is still elastic to the point where any attack will just bounce right off of him. Also with this technique, Luffy can bounce off of the air similar to Geppo, and moves so fast he seemingly disappears like Soru. Although this technique gives Luffy some amazing abilities, this form does have two downfalls. The first is that many of his techniques require Luffy to compress rather than stretch, which means many of these techniques will only work at close range. And the second downfall is that this technique can only be used for a short amount of time. And after that time is up, Luffy is barely able to move his body. So if he doesn't get the job done before Gear 4th deactivates, he's pretty much done for. As you can guess, Gear 4th comes with a few new and powerful techniques, such as the Gum Gum Kong Gun, which is where Luffy compresses his hand into his forearm and then unleashes an insanely powerful short-ranged punch. The Gum Gum Rhino Schneider, which is where Luffy compresses both of his feet into his shins to then release a double kick powerful enough to send some of the strongest enemies flying. the Gum Gum Culverin, which is where Luffy sends out a punch similar to the Gum Gum pistol. However, this one is very different. This is one of the only techniques in Gear 4th that stretches instead of compresses. But unlike his regular Gum Gum pistol punch, this punch will continue to redirect itself until it finally makes contact with his target. No matter how many times it takes, there is just no escape. And the Gum Gum King Kong gun, which essentially is the normal Kong gun, except this time around, Luffy blows even more air into his arm, similar to Gear 3rd, to deliver an enormous compressed punch. And in my opinion, I think this is probably currently Luffy's most powerful attack. Now moving on to the second Gear 4th form, which is called Tank Man Full Version. This form was achieved after Luffy ate a tremendous amount of biscuits to the point where he was extremely round and bloated. Apparently this form also drastically increases Luffy's durability, because beforehand while Luffy was in his Bound Man form against Cracker, he almost got his arm cut off by Cracker's sword. But after moving to Tank Man, Cracker's sword was unable to pierce Luffy at all. This form also brought forth one new technique called Gum Gum Cannonball, which is where Luffy compresses his stomach along with sucking the enemy into his compression, then launches them a great distance away with a tremendous amount of power and speed. But that does it for all of Luffy's Devil Fruit abilities, so let's look at his notable relationships, connections, and allies. And let me just add that Luffy has a ton of different allies, so I will try and briefly touch upon the important ones. The first group we need to talk about is his own crew. Luffy has some of the strongest and smartest pirates on his side, which help him out in a number of different situations. Generally, Luffy tends to fight his battles on his own, but when needed, Luffy and his crew make a great team when it comes to taking down tough foes. Additionally, without them, Luffy without a doubt would have never made it as far as he has, and without them, Luffy without a doubt would never be able to become the Pirate King. Luffy also has a fleet of pirate crews backing him. These crews are the Beautiful Pirates led by Cavendish, the Barto Club led by Bartolomeo, the Tonta Corps led by Leo, the Hapo Navy led by Sai, the Martial Arts Alliance led by Ideo, the new Giant Warrior Pirates led by Haruden, and the Yonta Maria Grand Fleet led by Orlumbus, for a grand total of 5,640 people ready to help Luffy anytime he is in need. So Luffy essentially has a small pirate army following him, which will without a doubt help his influence and help him defeat some very powerful enemies in the future. Luffy also has some considerable connections within his family. His father is the most wanted man in the world and the leader of the Revolutionary Army. And although the two actually haven't spoken yet, Luffy has made connections with other members of the Revolutionary Army. So it is without a doubt in my mind that the two will end up coming together at some point. And by the way, Dragon saved Luffy in Logtown, so it appears as though he does care about his son's life. So it's good to know that one of the most powerful men in the world is looking after Luffy in one way or another. Additionally, Luffy's brother Sabo is second in command in the Revolutionary Army, and those two always make it a goal to protect each other, so it is without a doubt in my mind that Luffy will have some sort of alliance with the Revolutionary Army, which is one of the most powerful and mysterious groups in the world, and this alliance will definitely come into play later on down the road. Luffy's grandfather Garp is also a notable ally, although I don't know if I would actually call them allies particularly. Luffy also has alliances or friendships with many other pirates and their crews. For instance, he is allied with the Heart Pirates and Trafalgar Law, and together they are on a mission to defeat the Yonko Kaido, who is considered the strongest creature in the world. And this alliance will definitely be a key factor in accomplishing that goal. And seeing as they already overthrew the Doflamingo family with their alliance, we can see that together they can accomplish some great things. Luffy is also allied with Boa Hancock, who is a Shichibukai. Without his alliance with her, Luffy would not have been able to break into Impel Down or temporarily save Ace. And she is also very powerful and has a big influence on many people, so it's good to keep her close. Luffy is also allied with Jinbei and the Fishman Pirates, which having the influence of the entire Fishman Island in addition to Jinbei and the Fishman Pirates is a very good alliance to have. Additionally, Jinbei is pretty much confirmed to eventually become a member of Luffy's crew, so with his influence and power, it will be awesome to have him aboard. Luffy is also allied with Silver's Rayleigh, who was the first mate of the former Pirate King himself. And Rayleigh helped train Luffy in many different aspects over the time skip, including how to control his haki. Without this training, Luffy would definitely still have a very long way to go to get to where he is now. And having such a powerful and wise man on his side has proved to be a great asset. Luffy also carries a strong relationship with Shanks, who is a Yonko, and the red-haired pirates. Although I don't ever see them fighting together in the near future, Shanks is Luffy's role model and the person Luffy aims to someday grow strong enough to defeat or surpass. So his relationship with Shanks is very important because it shows the level Luffy needs to reach to truly become the king of the pirates. There are also a bunch of other pirate alliances or friendships Luffy has made, but these were the ones I felt were most notable. Luffy also has a small connection to the Marines with Kobe, and connections to Alabasta, Skypiea, and Dressrosa for helping save their kingdoms. And these aren't even all the allies Luffy has. The list just goes on and on. But in the end, after we look at all the world powers, the only one Luffy isn't somewhat connected to is the Gorosei and the Celestial Dragons. So Luffy has connections in all the right places, which will definitely help him throughout his journey, and all of these connections are very important in calling Luffy one of the strongest characters in the One Piece world. But now that we've finally finished all of the important information about Luffy, let me explain to you why I believe he is strong enough to be in this top 10, and why I ranked him 10th for that matter. So we just went over a lot of information. Probably too much information at that. But knowing everything you can possibly know about these characters to really look at every angle is very important in my opinion. So why do I think Luffy deserves to be in this top 10? I know a lot of you out there will agree that Luffy is definitely one of the strongest, and I know a lot of you will also disagree thinking that Luffy is indeed strong, but he is currently by no means one of the top 10. Well, honestly, I can see it both ways, but saying Luffy isn't one of the strongest characters at this point in the story is a bit ridiculous. First, I want to discuss his relationships. Being that he is the main character and having progressed this far, he has created a seemingly endless amount of allies. And honestly, compared to other characters who will appear on the list, Luffy has more allies than almost every single one of them. And if he doesn't have more allies, he has debatably more important ones. What I mean by that is pretty simple, but mainly it comes down to the fact that Luffy gets special treatment as the main character. And to reach his goal of becoming the king of the pirates, he is going to need lots of help and tons of allies in important places to make that possible. Like we stated earlier, Luffy has at least one ally in every single type of world power aside from the Gorosei and the Celestial Dragons. So he really isn't missing out on much. He also has a fleet of over 5,000 men ready at a moment's notice to help Luffy with whatever he needs. He has a powerful crew helping him achieve his dream. He has other pirate crews allied with him, such as the Heart Pirates, who are working together with the Straw Hats to take down a Yonko, which will be no easy task. He has kingdoms such as Alabasta who are indebted to him, allied Shichibukai, both current and former, and just so many more. So in terms of influence and connections, Luffy is much more powerful than a lot of people who will appear on this list. In regards to Luffy's normal physical strength, he is definitely stronger than most thanks to Garp's training when Luffy was a kid. And let's be honest here for a second. Luffy isn't really a big looking guy by himself, so it's definitely surprising that he's as strong as he is. Do I think Luffy is the strongest character based on just raw physical strength? Hell no. Do I think a lot of his physical strength and other physical abilities is also the result of his Devil Fruit? Definitely. So let's move on to that. And let me just start out by saying that if Luffy wasn't as creative as he was, his Devil Fruit would be nowhere near as useful as it is. When I think of a fruit turning someone into a rubber man, it sounds like one of the worst ideas ever. But Luffy has proved me wrong time and time again, creating new and exciting techniques all throughout the story to combat different enemies and to just overall grow stronger. But something that I believe is a huge downfall in regards to his fruit is how dangerous it can be. A lot of Luffy's strongest techniques take a huge toll on Luffy's body after he uses them, such as Gear Second slowly taking time off of his lifespan with every use, and Gear Fourth leaving him unable to move after prolonged use, even so long as not being able to move for 3 whole days after using it twice in his fight against Doflamingo. So although his techniques are powerful enough to take out some of the most powerful foes, it comes at a big cost. And unfortunately for Luffy, other characters in One Piece are able to perform impressive techniques as well, but theirs don't come with any backlash, making theirs automatically better in comparison. But I will give credit where it is due by saying other characters' devil fruits are much better than Luffy's, but Luffy has found a way to make his devil fruit just as useful and powerful as theirs, if not more useful and powerful. Also, Luffy has found many ways to incorporate armament haki into his techniques to boost their potential, along with using haki to create entirely new techniques such as Gear 4th. Because honestly, without haki, Gear 4th likely wouldn't even exist. But moving on to Luffy's haki abilities, he is definitely one of the more proficient haki users from what we've seen. Luffy has access to all 3 types of haki, which is already a very impressive accomplishment. With Conqueror's haki, Luffy can already take out any normal human with a weak will without even touching them. And on top of that, since Conqueror's haki is based on willpower, Luffy has pretty much every other character in the series beat because Luffy's willpower is almost unmatched. His observation haki is also very impressive, but not as impressive as I was hoping. I've seen that Luffy can easily anticipate his enemy's moves, yet he still manages to let his opponent strike him way too many times. I understand that a lot of his opponents are very powerful and sometimes unpredictable, but I think Luffy really needs to step up his game and avoid some hits once in a while. So without a doubt, observation haki is his weakest of the 3. And finally, in regards to haki, his use of armament haki is also a force to be reckoned with, because Luffy has learned to easily cover his limbs quickly while fighting his enemies for both offensive and defensive purposes. Whether he is blocking an attack or performing an attack, his armament haki is on par with a lot of the other strong characters in One Piece. Additionally, Luffy has incorporated his armament haki into many of his techniques like we just stated earlier, including Gear 4th, to create his currently strongest technique, the King Kong gun, which is one of the stronger techniques we've seen so far in the One Piece world. And lastly, let's look at his intelligence. In terms of intelligence, Luffy is definitely lacking, but what he doesn't have in intelligence he makes up with willpower. And like I stated just before, in my opinion, I think Luffy has the most willpower compared to almost every other character. So something I really like about Luffy is that whenever he is lacking in something, he more than makes up for it in something else. And as a little bonus, since Luffy has a high immunity to poison now, I believe that he would be able to easily fight Magellan once again without having to worry too much about getting hurt or dying for that matter. So I feel like Luffy is currently superior to him, which is why Magellan won't be on this list. Also, Luffy's devil fruit seems to be the natural weakness to Enel's devil fruit, making it so Enel's lightning techniques do nothing to him. So simply for that reason, and the fact that Enel is not in the current storyline, he will also not be featured in this list, even though he is a very powerful character. Now, although I do believe Luffy is one of the strongest One Piece characters, I do not believe he should be placed any higher than 10 on this list. My main reasoning for this is because a lot of other characters on this list are just much stronger than Luffy in quite a few different ways. Maybe they aren't stronger in every aspect, but in the majority they definitely are. And a lot of you will probably disagree with this when you see who some of these characters are, because, spoiler alert, some of the characters on this list Luffy has battled in the past and defeated them. But just because Luffy won those fights does not mean he is the stronger character by any means. In fact, many of those fights were decided purely on the help of others or just Luffy's overwhelming willpower in general. And although both of those things do factor into making someone stronger, sometimes you're going to need to battle without them. The other reason I cannot place Luffy any higher is because of one unfortunate issue. That being the fact he is the main character of the series, and because of that he gets special treatment, or as many call it, plot armor. Now, in many situations, plot armor is a blessing, and automatically will make these characters stronger in one aspect or another, but to me it is almost cheating. We know for a fact that when Luffy goes up against the newest enemy that he is almost guaranteed to defeat them somehow. Of course, this isn't always the case, but it is about 90% of the time, which is just unfair to me. The best example in my eyes is Luffy's fight against Doflamingo. There is no way Luffy could have won that fight if the plot didn't depend on it. And in addition to that, by the end of the story, Luffy is going to end up being the strongest character or one of the top 5 no matter how you look at it. But Luffy is still far from that point and has quite a long way to go. So because Luffy is undoubtedly one of the strongest characters in One Piece right now, in pretty much all of the aspects we were looking at, he takes the 10th place on this list. but because he is not as strong as some of the others on this list, and he's not as strong as some of the opponents he managed to defeat in the past, sheerly because of plot armor, I cannot place him any higher than number 10. Number 9. Kuzon. Just like Luffy, the first thing we're going to be going over is his physical abilities. Considering that Kuzon was formerly an admiral of the Marines, he has immense physical strength. For instance, he was easily able to battle against Diamond Jozu and even Whitebeard himself while being seemingly equal in power to them. He was also able to take a hockey-imbued kick from Marco the Phoenix and come out seemingly uninjured. Also, during his battle with Jozu, he took on a hockey-imbued strike from Jozu while he was covered in diamonds, and Kuzon came out of it with only a small scratch on his lip, showing that even some of his powerful attacks barely affect his defensive capabilities. He can also jump a very great distance in only a matter of seconds, very similar to the technique Soru, which his speed could either be Soru or just his natural speed in general. We can also assume his endurance and stamina is unmatched, because he was able to battle Sakazuki alone for 10 whole days on an island before finally being defeated. Kuzon also has very good hearing, as he was able to hear something in the water before the war at Marineford began. Also, as a testament to his strength, Jaguar D. Saul, who was capable of lifting warships himself, has said that Kuzon's strength was abnormal even before he became an admiral. So we can safely assume that there's even more we have yet to see about this man's strength. In regards to his intelligence, Kuzon is a very complex and hard to read character. He acted very lazy and aloof while he was an admiral, so it often appears as though he isn't very intelligent. But considering he was a Marine admiral, I think it's safe to assume he is much smarter than he looks, especially considering how he easily shed his lazy attitude once the Marineford War began. So although not much is known about how smart he actually is, I think it's safe to say we shouldn't underestimate his intelligence. But I also don't think he's a genius either. Next, let's discuss his ability to use haki. Unfortunately, we haven't seen Kuzon use haki very much at all. However, we do know that he possesses it, because it has been stated that all Marines with the rank of Vice Admiral or higher have the ability to use haki. And when Kuzon was a member of the Marines, he was an admiral, so we can safely assume his ability to use haki is definitely way above average. So far, we have only seen one instance of Kuzon using haki, which was armament haki, and he used it along with Kizaru and Sakazuki to create a shield that stopped Whitebeard from destroying the execution platform. Now, with the 2-year time skip, it is also safe to assume that his haki has gotten stronger as well. Now, moving on to his devil fruit, which is the Hiya Hiya no Mi, otherwise known as the Chili Chili fruit. This devil fruit is a Logia type and allows Kuzon to turn both himself and the area surrounding him into ice. It should also be noted that this fruit is superior to the Yuki Yuki no Mi, making it automatically a bit higher on the list, even though Monet is dead, so she isn't eligible for this list anyways. It should also be noted that this fruit was able to go up against the Magu Magu no Mi for 10 whole days, and that fruit has been said to be this fruit's natural weakness. So the very fact that this fruit was able to go up against the fruit it is weak against for 10 whole days and actually put up a decent fight is a huge accomplishment by itself. But in addition to that, this fruit was also powerful enough to turn half of an island into a frozen wasteland over the course of that 10-day battle. And the fact that this fruit can also change the environment from prolonged use is also a big accomplishment in terms of how powerful this fruit can really be. This fruit's main use is for combat purposes, but it can also be used for other things. This fruit allows the user to freeze anyone or anything that comes into contact with them, whether or not Kuzon makes contact with the object in question or the object makes contact with him. If a person were to be frozen and any area that is frozen is not treated properly and immediately, that person will become frostbitten, which leads to permanent tissue damage. Additionally, if anyone he freezes completely is not thawed almost immediately, they will die. However, that person will also remain alive while frozen inside the ice for a short period of time. And if the ice is broken with the person still inside, they will also shatter, killing them. This devil fruit also makes Kuzon himself very resistant to the cold, meaning he can easily survive in harsh frozen environments without freezing to death. Also, unlike most other Logia, this fruit's element is solid, meaning that although Kuzon can turn into his element to bypass attacks, he will still be physically hit. Although any ice that is broken from the hit will just reform right away, meaning that parts of his body were not in danger of being broken along with it. Kuzon has also created a number of different techniques that he can use, such as Ice Age, Age, where he places his hands on large bodies of water such as the ocean and can freeze the whole area in an instant, along with everything else the water touches. This ice can stretch for miles and will not thaw for a whole week. And Ice Age can be very useful for creating a platform to walk on, or say freezing an enemy ship in place so it cannot escape at sea. The Ice Time Capsule, where Kuzan creates a wave of ice that travels along the ground, and anything it touches will completely freeze. The Ice Ball, where Kuzan freezes a victim in a gigantic ice sphere from a distance. And the Ice Block Pheasant Beak, which is where Kuzan releases a gigantic wave of ice in the shape of a pheasant all at once. It should also be noted that Kuzan can create weapons such as a spear out of his ice, and throw this spear at enemies from afar as a method of having a long-ranged attack, because many of his techniques involve directly touching his enemies, meaning that most attacks need to be performed in close proximity. Also, this fruit is one of the few that can counteract its weakness to falling in water, because Kuzan can simply freeze the water around him and then walk on the surface to escape the sea. And that about does it for his devil fruit, so lastly, let's look at his connections. Although Kuzan is no longer a Marine, I think it's very safe to say that he still managed to remain friends with many of his allies who are still Marines, such as Smoker and Sengoku. It has also been said that while he was in the Marines, he was very popular with Marines of all ranks, which leads me to believe that even though he is not still a member of the Marines, he still has his connections from within, to a certain extent of course. Unfortunately for him though, when he resigned from the Marines, he also cut all ties with the world government, so a lot of his useful connections are no longer available. And although we currently don't know much about the situation, it seems as though Kuzan has allied himself with the underworld brokers in some way, and it was also confirmed by the Gorosei that Kuzan has also allied himself with the Blackbeard pirates. And although we don't know what their working relationship is, having any alliance with a Yonko is a connection to be feared by many. So right away, compared to all the information we have about Luffy, it feels as if Kuzan falls a bit short, which I can definitely see. But there are a couple reasons why I think Kuzan is stronger than Luffy. The first being that Kuzan's fruit is superior to Luffy's. You see, although rubber itself can't exactly freeze, when rubber gets exposed to very cold temperatures it becomes hard and brittle, making it very hard to stretch. On top of that, when Luffy first fought Kuzan, he was almost immediately defeated. And at Marineford, although they didn't encounter each other for very long, it was very easy for Kuzan to take advantage of him once again. 2 years later, Luffy is obviously much stronger, but I'm also guessing Kuzan is as well. So although I feel like Luffy would put up a decent fight against him, I feel like the power of ice would end up doing nothing but slowing Luffy down until he is ultimately defeated. In addition, if Kuzan was able to battle against the Magu Magu no Mi, which his fruit is weak against for 10 whole days, what do you think he could do against a fruit he has the advantage against? Well, I'll tell ya, defeat it. Although in comparison to Luffy, Kuzan has his advantages and of course his disadvantages. Even though Kuzan puts on a very lazy demeanor, I still believe he is decently intelligent, whereas Luffy is not very intelligent. So I think in a battle of brains, Kuzan would be able to take the cake. Physically, I feel like the two are about even or pretty close too, but Kuzan likely has the upper edge when it comes to raw physical power. In terms of haki, Luffy has the edge, but only because we truly don't know what Kuzan can really do. I imagine he would need to be very proficient with it to achieve the role of Admiral in the first place, but even so, Luffy has shown a great deal of mastery when it comes to haki, and since Kuzan likely doesn't have Conqueror's haki, Luffy has him beat. And in terms of connections, Luffy definitely has the upper hand, but Kuzan also has allies in places Luffy does not, which also gives him some leverage. Not only is he somewhat allied with Marines from his time serving with them, but he also has some sort of relationship with some of Luffy's enemies, the Underworld and the Yonko Blackbeard. So although Luffy has many allies and some very important ones, Kuzan has allies that Luffy likely never will. So compared to Luffy, I think the two are about even in most aspects. Something Luffy is lacking, Kuzan reigns superior, and something Kuzan is lacking, Luffy reigns superior. But even with all that give and take, it ends up coming down to which one would have the advantage in a fight. And because Kuzon has the superior Devil Fruit, I think he would end up being stronger than Luffy. Now, compared to other people who will appear on this list, Kuzon would still put up a good fight with each of them, but I believe that all of the other characters on this list would be able to defeat Kuzon in one way or another. Some of these characters have defeated him or went up against him in the past, while others on the list are simply just speculation. I feel it is also important to note that after Kuzon's fight with Sakazuki, he has a lot of scars and possible tissue damage. He also ended up losing his left leg in their battle, and now uses a leg made out of ice as a prosthetic. So I also feel that his missing limb could cause Kuzon a lot of problems during a battle. Whether his ice leg is broken during the battle and he doesn't have enough time to form a new one, or it simply doesn't work as well as an actual leg, I feel it does hurt his combat potential. So overall, Kuzon is definitely one of the strongest characters in One Piece, but there are still quite a few characters that I feel are stronger than him, and characters who have superiority to his abilities. So because of that, Kuzon will remain at number 9. Number 8. Don Quixote Doflamingo. Much like Luffy, we've got a lot of information to cover with Doflamingo, so go grab some more snacks. But like the rest, we'll begin with his physical abilities. So I honestly don't even know what to start with regarding his physical abilities, because Doflamingo has massive strength, insanely fast reflexes, incredible speed, great defensive abilities, and endurance. And that's not even everything. So let us begin with his physical strength, which to say the least is monstrous. For a few different examples, Doflamingo was never even injured until the Dressrosa arc. And with that, you need to keep in mind he also participated in the Marineford War, where so many big names were injured in one way or another. Yet Doflamingo made it out without even a scratch. It has also been said by Trafalgar Law that if Doflamingo were to resign from the Shichibukai, the Marines would send their most powerful members, which are the Admirals, to take him down because Doflamingo is so powerful that anyone else wouldn't even be able to put up a decent fight against him. Doflamingo himself also has a very monstrous build, being 10 feet tall. And with that build and the strength he possesses, he is easily able to carry around a human being without ever getting tired. His arms are obviously very strong, but his real strength lies in his legs, because his fighting style specializes in immensely powerful kicks, being able to easily destroy large rocks, metal, and even entire buildings with a single kick. Doflamingo's leg strength is also so immense that he was able to create a 360-degree shockwave with one swing of his leg that was powerful enough to cut through all 3 of the Dressrosa Palace towers. So when it comes to raw physical strength, Doflamingo is vastly superior to the majority of characters in One Piece. When it comes down to speed, Doflamingo is tremendously fast. Some of this, of course, comes from his Devil Fruit ability being able to pull himself in directions if need be, but by himself he is also fast enough to easily dodge most attacks that come his way. And if he is unable to dodge it in time, he is still fast enough to block the incoming attack with ease, making both his speed and reflexes very hard to counter. He was also able to easily dodge Oars Jr.'s attacks and jump over him, along with escape Crocodile's Sandstorm without taking any damage. So although he is by no means the fastest character, he is fast enough to give most powerful characters a run for their life. And last but not least, Doflamingo's defensive abilities and endurance are on a whole nother level. Even at the very young age of 8 years old, Doflamingo was able to withstand numerous sessions of torture from mobs of people without cracking under pressure, but instead swearing his revenge against them. So now, over 30 years later, his pain tolerance is almost non-existent, because it seems as if there are very few ways to actually hurt him. For instance, in the beginning of the Dressrosa arc, when Baby 5 hit him with an explosive round to the face, and it didn't damage him or phase him in the slightest, and he just continued with what he was doing as though nothing happened. Meaning his body must be so strong to the point where it takes a lot of power just to make him feel something. Another good example of his defensive capabilities was his ability to easily block Sanji's Diablo Jambi kick and a barrage of Sanji's other kicks afterwards without taking any damage, which in comparison, Sanji's kicks are easily able to destroy a pacifista's body effortlessly. So the fact that Doflamingo could block those attacks so easily while taking no damage and not even using his haki is very, very impressive. He was also able to take a direct hit from Law's Gamma knife, which must have been painful even for him, and then he was able to still continue on as if his organs didn't just get badly injured. He was also able to take a barrage of Luffy's attacks without taking too much damage, and even being able to still get back up and fight stronger than ever after getting pummeled time and time again by Luffy's Gear 4th attacks, until the point where Doflamingo was finally defeated. And you still need to keep in mind that he did all of this while his organs were badly damaged. So during that situation, imagine what Doflamingo could withstand if his insides were unharmed. Moving on to his intelligence, Doflamingo may not be what we would consider a downright genius, but he is definitely very intelligent and a mastermind whenever it comes to his schemes. A few good examples of what I mean would be the way he attempted to separate Law and Luffy when they entered Dressrosa by offering the Mera Mera no Mi as a prize, because he knew that Luffy would never let anyone else have his brother's devil fruit. And sure enough, Doflamingo was correct, which shows that he has great insight. And his plan ended up working heavily in his favor just like he thought it would, even if it would backfire later on. Another good example would be how Doflamingo used his connection with the world government and the celestial dragons to make his enemies think he had left the Shichibukai, which would in turn trap them. Which, like I've said earlier, the connections that these characters have are very important in deciding how strong you actually are. Because with friends in high places like this, you can accomplish some pretty devastating things. So the fact that Doflamingo actually uses these connections in his strategy shows how intelligent he really is. And my last example would be how Doflamingo found a way to reclaim Dressrosa by offering the people their lives along with prize money for taking down the ones who overthrew him in the first place, which moved most people back to his side of the playing field. For a little while at least. This example here truly shows that even if Doflamingo is seemingly backed into a corner, or his plans are crumbling beneath him, he can still quickly think of a way to turn the tables back in his favor, and then swiftly execute his new counterattack, showing that there is more than meets the eye with this heavenly demon. Next up is his ability to use Haki. And something I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about his strength and defensive capabilities was that the majority of what we discussed was without his use of Haki. So before I even begin to talk about his Haki, can you imagine how much more powerful he is when he applies Haki to his attacks and uses it for defense? Jesus fucking Christ, he really is a monster. Anyway, Doflamingo is able to use both Armament Haki and Conqueror's Haki, which since we talked about what these are earlier, I'm just going to assume you guys remember what they do for the rest of the video. But the sheer fact that Doflamingo can use Conqueror's Haki is already an accomplishment by itself, because there are currently only 6 living characters in the series who have access to it. Additionally, unlike the other characters, his Conqueror's Haki was first awakened when he was only 10 years old. Unfortunately, we don't get to see Doflamingo use this Haki too much, but he does use it against the G5 soldiers during his fight with Smoker. And we also get to see its effect when his Haki clashes with Luffy's. But even if we don't get to see it too much, the fact that he still has it is enough to give him an edge on this list. However, when it comes to his Armament Haki, it's not as good as it could be. But don't get me wrong, it is still way above average. The reason I say it's not as good as it could be is because although he has no problem blocking powerful attacks like Luffy's Jet Gatling without taking any damage, and using his Haki to soften the blow from Luffy's Gear 4th techniques, but the problem is his Haki is not powerful enough to defend from sharp objects or blades, because we can visibly see that his hand is cut when he grabs Law's sword. So defensively, on top of his monstrous endurance, his Haki is pretty darn good, but not the best. And offensively, it basically just makes all of his attacks a bit more powerful, but that's what Armament Haki does for pretty much everyone else too. But since Doflamingo already has immense strength, his attacks can only get so much stronger with the use of Haki. So offensively, I would say his Haki is better than his use of it defensively because it seems to benefit him a bit more. Also, one thing I wanted to add was that Doflamingo can imbue the strings from his Devil Fruit with Haki as well, meaning that his already overpowered strings can now injure Logia users. And when Doflamingo used this against Smoker, who is a Logia user, he was severely injured because of it. So even if his Haki doesn't necessarily make his Devil Fruit ability much stronger, it does make it useful against other Devil Fruit users, specifically the Logia, giving him a better edge in a fight. Now, since we just brought it up, let's move on to his Devil Fruit, which is the Ito Ito no Mi, or the String Fruit. And what this fruit does is it allows the user to create and manipulate strings. These strings are very thin, razor sharp, and virtually indestructible, and can be attached to pretty much anything. from people, objects, and even non-solid objects like clouds. These strings can be generated from seemingly any part of the user's own body, including their organs, and are mostly seen protruding from the user's palms and fingertips. These strings can be used a ton of different ways as well, such as swiping his hands to release piano wire looking strings that can slice through pretty much anything from people, buildings, weapons, and more, creating bundled up strings that can be constructed into rope, bullets, and even an identical clone of himself. He can also control people like a puppet by attaching his strings to their spine, and in addition to that, he can control multiple people at the same time. And he can even fly or transport himself through the air by attaching his strings to nearby clouds. So the possibilities for this one are seemingly endless. Also, like we stated earlier, Doflamingo can also use these strings to stitch up his internal organs when they are badly injured. Like I mentioned before, these strings are also so durable to the point where they are virtually indestructible, because so far there are very few ways to damage them whatsoever. These strings are also so thin when they are not compressed, to the point where if you weren't aware he had this ability, you probably wouldn't even see the attack coming. Additionally, one small downfall is that these strings can seemingly cut through anything, but they are unable to cut through Sea Prism Stone. And these strings can also be blocked or deflected with Armament Haki. So if you were to say cover a sword in Haki, these strings would not be able to cut through it. But now that we know what this Devil Fruit can do, let's look at some of his signature techniques. Parasite, which is basically where he controls one or more people like a puppet. Goshikito, which is where Doflamingo swipes his hand to send string from each finger flying at his opponent or other object, and these strings can cut through almost anything like we recently stated. Overheat, which is a bunch of string condensed into a giant whip used to basically whip his enemies. Also in the anime, it should be noted that this whip appears to look as if it is emitting heat, but this is anime only, and as far as we know, this whip does not actually generate heat. Side note, this whip can also travel many kilometers, so good luck running away from it. Termite, which are bullet strings that he fires from his fingers. Black Knight, which is Doflamingo's almost identical clone of himself made entirely out of strings. It should also be noted that Doflamingo is in control of this clone, and the clone itself is pretty damn strong considering it's just moving string. This clone is strong enough to slap away a jet pistol from Luffy, and since it does not feel pain, it is very beneficial to use in a fight. It should also be noted that unlike Doflamingo's normal strings, these Black Knight clones can be damaged, such as when Kiros cut off a clone's head. Although this could just be the string separating rather than breaking, so that is up for debate. Athlete, which is where Doflamingo attaches string to his foot and then sends a powerful kick to his opponent. This attack was also powerful enough to injure Luffy even when he was defending with Armament Haki. And finally, the Torikago, better known as the Birdcage. This is considered Doflamingo's ultimate technique. To perform this technique, Doflamingo shoots an enormous amount of string into the air that forms what appears to be a giant birdcage around Doflamingo's location that covers a very great distance. The string pillars then trap anyone on the inside of the cage because there is no way to escape without defeating Doflamingo himself. And the reason for that is because these pillars will cut almost anything they come in contact with. Doflamingo can also choose to bring the cage boundaries closer to him, forcing people on the inside to inevitably come closer and closer to his location. And he can also control the speed in which the cage moves at will. Although the wires cannot be stopped without defeating Doflamingo, the cage can be slowed down with enough physical forces pushing it back. And like we stated earlier, most of these techniques can also be applied with Haki to make them both stronger and able to hit Logia Devil Fruit users who were previously intangible, making this Devil Fruit something to really fear. But it doesn't even stop there. Doflamingo has found a way to awaken his Devil Fruit, which is something we have not seen very much of yet in the series. And as of making this video, he is currently the only confirmed Paramecia Devil Fruit user to awaken his fruit. This awakening allows him to transform his surroundings into string, so the ground, nearby buildings, and other objects can become Doflamingo strings at will, making this fruit seem like a whole nother beast entirely. With these new strings, Doflamingo has also created a whole new plethora of techniques, which we will go over now. Break White, which is where Doflamingo creates two gigantic pillars or sheets of string that wrap around his opponent and crush them. Off-White, which is where Doflamingo creates two masses of string as a shield or defensive measure that can also push away his opponent. Flap Thread, which is where Doflamingo uses tons of strings from the surrounding environment to form this string into a bunch of points, which all fly at his opponent in the form of wings, and are said to feel like 1,000 arrows piercing all at once. and God Thread, which is where Doflamingo forms the string into 16 thick strings that he sends at his opponent all at once. Although this attack was deflected by Luffy's King Kong gun, it still managed to pierce through Luffy's arm slightly before being overpowered. However, this was done with the help of Doflamingo imbuing Haki into the God Thread as well. So it is possible for him to add Haki to his awakened abilities, making them even stronger, if you can believe that. But that pretty much covers his Devil Fruit abilities, so lastly, let's talk about his notable connections and allies. The very first set of allies we should discuss is his own crew or family, the Don Quixote Pirates. These allies are by far the most important to Doflamingo, and he shows undying love and respect to each member in his upper ranks, and will continue to show respect unless one of them were to betray him. Each member of his family are very powerful in their own way, and many of them have a Devil Fruit, meaning that he also has a small army of different Devil Fruit abilities at his disposal. With this crew, he was also able to take over the entire kingdom of Dressrosa and rule it accordingly. Although each member of this elite family are notable in their own way, let's talk about the very important ones. The most important are definitely his 4 elite officers, Virgo, Treble, Pika, and Diamante. Each one of them are responsible not only for Doflamingo's well-being, especially when he was young, but they are also each insanely powerful. Not by any means on Doflamingo's own level of strength, but they are strong enough to go toe-to-toe with a member of the Supernovas like Zoro. Virgo was probably the most important member of the 4 regarding what he was tasked with doing, which was infiltrating the Marines from the inside as an undercover agent. And Doflamingo has also said Virgo is his most convenient and trustworthy Marine officer, meaning that Doflamingo likely has other undercover agents hiding within the Marines. But now that Virgo is dead and we have no proof of others on the inside, this is no longer valid. Another important member of his crew would of course be Sugar, specifically for the use of her Devil Fruit ability, which allowed Doflamingo to have an even tighter grasp on Dressrosa and what happens to its people if they disobey. Doflamingo also had the undying loyalty of Bellamy and the Bellamy Pirates, and though they have defected since, it opens up the discussion as to whether or not Doflamingo has other pirate crews who are allied to him, which I would say he definitely does. So even though we don't know any of them offhand, Doflamingo definitely has other crews working under him that could help him whenever he is in need. Although his defeat definitely took a hit on this next connection, Doflamingo also has connections to the underworld, and he himself was one of the most influential underworld brokers. Because of this, we can only imagine that Doflamingo has a lot of very dangerous connections that we aren't even aware of. And considering that Doflamingo was an owner of a Slade trading house, and he sold Caesar Clown's artificial devil fruits through the underworld as well as along with other items, we can only assume that for his services, other members of the underworld would be willing to help him out if he were in need. Which, because of the underworld, it leads me to his next connection, which is his connection to the Yonko, Kaido. Doflamingo, along with Caesar Clown, supplied Kaido with the smiles he uses for his crew of beasts. Kaido purchases these through Doflamingo via the underworld, and although Doflamingo fears Kaido and was afraid Kaido would kill him if he could not produce the smiles, Kaido still sent one of his strongest men, a member of the 3 disasters, Jack the Drought, to try and rescue Doflamingo from the Marines. This right here proves that Doflamingo's connection to Kaido is a very important one, to the point where Kaido would send one of his strongest men to try and set him free. So Doflamingo having a Yonko as his ally is definitely a very important connection to have. And finally, Doflamingo also has a weird connection with the world government, to say the least. Doflamingo himself has descended from one of the 20 kings who founded the world government 800 years ago. So Doflamingo himself was a world noble back in the day before his father forfeited their rights as nobles to live among the people. Since then, Doflamingo has found a way to blackmail the world government, or more specifically the Celestial Dragons, with his knowledge of the national treasure in Marie Joyce. From this, Doflamingo blackmailed the world government into making him a Shichibukai and the Celestial Dragons to get somewhat equal rights to them. So because of that, Doflamingo is able to accomplish things that many people never could, such as when he got a false story printed in the newspaper about himself leaving the Shichibukai to fool Luffy and Law. There is literally no one else besides the world government and the Celestial Dragons who could pull something like this off. So although he's not exactly on good terms with the world government or the Celestial Dragons for that matter, he still has the ability to use their power for his own benefit, which is something pretty much every other character on this list will never be able to do. Also, as a side note, it was revealed that the person who commanded Doflamingo to kill Gecko Moria was somebody above even Sengoku at the time, so Doflamingo has connections in some high places, and that pretty much does it for all his notable allies. So in conclusion, let's talk about why I believe he is one of the strongest, if it's not obvious already, and why I placed him where I did on this list. To me, Doflamingo is one of the physically strongest characters revealed in the series so far, in terms of both his offense and defensive abilities. Do I think Doflamingo is the strongest out of everyone else physically? Not a chance. But compared to some of the other characters on this list, I still think his physical capabilities remain supreme. And his pain tolerance is also on a whole new level. Now, personally, I believe some of that has to do with his willpower, which in turn goes hand in hand with his ability to use Conqueror's Haki. And speaking of his Haki, I think Doflamingo is a weird case, because I feel like his armament Haki is of course way above average, but compared to some of the other characters, it seems as if it's a bit lacking, because Doflamingo is already physically a monster. So because of that, I feel most of his attacks wouldn't see a big increase in power when he uses it versus other characters like Luffy, whose Haki greatly increases his attack power. But because Doflamingo has access to Conqueror's Haki, he still gets a big thumbs up when it comes to his Haki abilities. Regarding his Devil Fruit, I think Doflamingo has one of the most powerful, useful, and versatile Devil Fruits in the One Piece world, and he has definitely shown us what it is capable of. I won't repeat everything because we went over a lot, but the main points I make is the amount of things this Devil Fruit is capable of doing is astronomical. The ability to apply Haki to his strings to hurt Logia users is only a big benefit, and the sheer fact that Doflamingo is able to take over an entire kingdom with his abilities is crazy. That just shows on a larger scale what he is capable of. On top of that, he is also one of the only characters who have been confirmed to have awakened his Devil Fruit, giving him an entirely new range of abilities and making it seem as if Doflamingo has a different Devil Fruit entirely. And the final thing I want to mention about his Devil Fruit is that compared to a fruit like Luffy's, Doflamingo's Devil Fruit does not harm him physically with extended use or certain techniques, which automatically gives him the edge. Regarding his intelligence, I feel like Doflamingo is one of those characters people don't really think of as being overly intelligent, but to me he is one of the smartest characters revealed so far. Now, I don't think he is at the level of a genius by any means, but he's pretty darn close. I've already went over a bunch of examples above, but basically he has a plan for seemingly every possible situation or outcome, and he knows how to easily manipulate anyone he comes in contact with. And finally, Doflamingo has a lot of good connections in some powerful places. He has a Yonko, powerful crew, people in the Marines most likely, and the power of the Celestial Dragons at his fingertips. So although he may not have as many allies as say Luffy, he does have some of the most powerful at his disposal, making him someone you don't want to make an enemy of. So in regards to why I think he is stronger than Kuzan, it brings me back to their encounter when Doflamingo was attacking Smoker. Kuzan came up and froze Doflamingo completely, and Doflamingo was able to easily break himself out of the ice, which is something we have not seen many characters able to do yet. For instance, when Kuzan fought against Jozu, Jozu was completely frozen and was unable to break himself out, resulting in Jozu losing an arm, whereas Doflamingo was able to easily break out of the ice. Now in terms of raw power, I feel like Doflamingo has the edge, but Kuzan would still be able to give him a pretty difficult time. I also think Doflamingo is more intelligent than Kuzan, giving him a better sense of strategy, so I feel like by himself Kuzan would not be able to take Doflamingo down, but he would be able to give Doflamingo a solid run for his money. Another reason why I believe Kuzan wouldn't be able to defeat Doflamingo is because in regards to Luffy, I don't think Luffy would have ever been able to beat Doflamingo if it wasn't for Law's Gamma Knife. And of course, Luffy's famous plot armor. So if Luffy himself needed help to defeat Doflamingo, I feel like Kuzan would also need some sort of help to take Doflamingo down. Now moving on to Luffy. Like I just said, it would be impossible for Luffy to beat Doflamingo if Luffy wasn't the main character. And the only reason why Luffy was able to take him down was because of his allies, which does help make a character stronger. But like I've already said before, sometimes you need to do things on your own. And don't get me wrong, the fact that Luffy is strong enough to go up against Doflamingo and even defeat him is one hell of an accomplishment. But just because someone beats someone else in a fight doesn't always mean they are the stronger individual. So what I'm looking at is, would Doflamingo be able to beat Luffy's and Kuzan's raw physical power? Yes. Would he be able to beat them in a battle of intelligence? Yes. How does his Devil Fruit compare to theirs? is definitely on par, if not better. How is his haki compared to theirs? It's not quite as good as Luffy's in my opinion, but I think he has equal at least against Kuzon. And how does his allies fare with theirs? Now, interestingly enough, they all have a different set of powerful allies, and I feel as if all three of them were to have some sort of three-way war against each other's allies, Doflamingo would put up one hell of a fight, considering his connections with both a Yonko and the world government. But would he win? That's up for debate. I feel like because of all of this, Doflamingo definitely deserves to be above both of those two on the list. And Doflamingo has without a doubt earned his spot as the 8th strongest character in One Piece. But if he's only number 8, who could possibly be stronger than him? Number 7, Charlotte Cracker. So let us begin with his physical abilities. And without even talking about specifics, Cracker is without a doubt very powerful. Cracker is powerful enough to be one of the 3 highest ranking members in the Yonko Big Mom's crew, which are dubbed the 3 Sweet Commanders. And to be considered strong enough to rank highly in a Yonko's crew is definitely something that cannot be achieved without some serious power. Additionally, Cracker currently also has the 3rd highest bounty revealed in the series so far, which is 860 million berries, meaning that the world government considers him a highly dangerous individual. Now, before we continue on, something else I wanted to bring up real quick would be the other 2 Sweet Commanders, who are Smoothie and Katakuri. As of right now, Katakuri hasn't even been revealed, so since we know nothing about them, they will not be on this list. And when it comes to Smoothie, she was only revealed a couple chapters ago, so we do know a little bit of information about her, but not near enough to put her on this list. So I do want to acknowledge that if Smoothie and Katakuri are anything like Cracker in terms of abilities, they would definitely have a place on this list. But as of right now, we simply don't have enough information to decide where they would be at on the list. And I don't really like making assumptions unless I have a bit of information to back it up. I also want to note that Smoothie has the 2nd highest bounty revealed in the series, which is 932 million berries. So she is without a doubt on the same level or higher than Cracker, just based on the bounty alone. So like I said before, since we don't know enough about her abilities, she will not be on this list. But I would like to give her an honorable mention regardless, and I would assume that she would be somewhere near Cracker on this list if I were to put her on it. But anyways, now let's get back to Cracker. And something else I wanted to mention about him is how just the sound of his voice alone is enough for the nearby homies to cower in fear. Which implies that Cracker is so powerful that his comrades even fear what he could possibly do. When it comes to his physical strength, Cracker is easily able to carry around a sword that is much bigger than his actual body, and swing it at very great speed, showing us that the weight of that massive sword is almost nothing to him. He is also able to physically repel Luffy and his attacks without any problem whatsoever. In regards to his durability, Cracker is a bit lacking because of how he was knocked unconscious from Luffy's Tank Man technique. However, to be fair, he flew quite a long way, crashing into multiple things along the way as well, so it must have been a very powerful attack that did a lot of damage to him. But I feel like other characters on this list would still be able to get back up and fight after taking on that attack. So his durability could be a tad bit better, but it's still not too bad, because Cracker was easily able to withstand some of Luffy's other powerful attacks without even being injured. But what he lacks in durability, he makes up in stamina, as he was able to easily fight and chase after Luffy for 11 whole hours while constantly using his Devil Fruit ability, which does take a small toll on his stamina. So the fact that he was able to keep going after that is very impressive. Something else I want to add is that his physical attacks are also greatly increased with armament haki, but we'll discuss that in a little bit here. In regards to his intelligence, I believe that Cracker is a lot smarter than most people think, especially when it comes to deception. Although we'll talk about his actual Devil Fruit ability in a little bit here, Cracker used his Devil Fruit's ability to hide in a Biscuit Soldier he created as a suit of armor. And because the Biscuit Soldier looks nothing like his actual appearance, the world government and the Marines don't know what Cracker's actual appearance is, or they think his Biscuit Soldier is Cracker's actual appearance. Because of that, his wanted poster even features this false appearance. So Cracker is so crafty that he successfully fooled the world government this whole entire time, leading to the ultimate deception. Another example was the way he tried to fool Luffy into thinking his Devil Fruit ability was the ability to multiply his limbs and weapons. And finally, on top of that, that, he also made his biscuit armor cough up jam that looked like blood, to make it appear as if he was badly wounded when in reality he wasn't even injured, leading to a very tricky counterattack. So the fact that Cracker is smart enough to not only deceive the world government, but also deceive his opponent more than once in the middle of a battle is something that most characters wouldn't be able to do. So although he may not be a genius or close to one by any means, he is still a rather smart individual. Moving on to his hockey abilities, Cracker only has the ability to use armament hockey. However, his armament hockey is definitely the strongest we've seen on this list so far. Luffy, who I would say was our previous best armament hockey user on this list, has even said during battle that Cracker's hockey was extremely tough. So that right there is saying something in terms of its defensive capabilities. But when it comes to his offensive use of hockey, Cracker can not only apply this to his normal attacks, but he can also apply it to his gigantic sword. And when he does, his sword's cutting power along with his overall attack power is greatly increased, to the point where Cracker almost cut off Luffy's arm with his hockey-imbued sword while Luffy was using Gear 4th. In comparison, Doflamingo's awakened strings imbued with hockey were only able to slightly damage Luffy's Gear 4th arm. So the fact that Cracker would have been able to cut it off shows how powerful he and his hockey really is. Cracker can also apply his hockey to his biscuit soldiers and armor to make them even more powerful as well. So when it comes to his ability to use armament hockey, he is definitely the best on the list so far. However, he does not possess Conqueror's hockey or observation hockey, so his hockey is not quite as good in terms of variety. Next up, let's discuss his Devil Fruit, which is the Bisu Bisu no Mi. This Devil Fruit allows the user to generate and manipulate biscuits at will, making them a biscuit human. With this ability, the user can seemingly create an unlimited amount of these biscuits, and the biscuits themselves can be manipulated in a ton of different ways and is really only limited to the user's imagination. Considering that Cracker himself is somewhat of a master craftsman, he is capable of manipulating these biscuits into large moving human-like figures that are very realistic. Cracker can also create weapons for these figures, and if he so chooses, extra limbs and weapons. Cracker can control their movements at will, and so far there does not seem to be a limit to the amount he can control at once. Additionally, he can also get inside a biscuit soldier and control them from the inside. These biscuit soldiers are extremely strong and durable, but they can still be broken with enough brute force, and water will soften the biscuits to the point where they can be eaten. So this Devil Fruit does have a slight disadvantage in rainy weather or wet areas. So far with this Devil Fruit, we've only seen Cracker use two different techniques, which are Biscuit Soldier, which is where Cracker creates and controls his soldiers made out of biscuits, and Hard Biscuit. This technique is used when Cracker himself is inside a biscuit soldier. He then multiplies his biscuit-shaped shield and covers it with armament hockey, and then slams it into his opponent mainly to pin them to the ground, but it could also be used as a way to repel or stun his enemies. This Devil Fruit is definitely a very powerful and useful one. However, I think some of the others on this list are a bit better, mainly because this fruit does affect his stamina with prolonged use. And certain situations also render it a bit weaker, such as with rain. But I also believe that this fruit could be used in a lot of different ways other than just creating soldiers and weapons. Just think of all the potential things Cracker could create with all these biscuits. So because of all the extra possibilities, I'm still willing to say it's one of the better Devil Fruits for sure. And finally, let's look at his notable connections or allies. His only big connection that we currently know about is the Yonko and his own mother, Big Mom, and her crew. Cracker himself is one of her 3 commanders, so because of that he has great authority within the crew itself, being able to single-handedly command large fleets into battle. But the main reason Big Mom is such an important ally to have is because Big Mom herself has over 80 children, Cracker himself being her 10th son. But what Big Mom strives to do is marry each of her children into a family that will somehow benefit or strengthen her crew. And with over 80 children who will eventually be married into powerful families, therefore creating powerful allies, because once these allies are married into her family, they are automatically considered part of her crew. The amount of allies that Big Mom possesses could be somewhat endless. 2 examples of these allies are the Germa 66, and although they are not allies by marriage quite yet, they are still currently on good terms. and another would be the Fishman Pirates, both of which are very powerful groups of individuals. Another thing that should be noted is Big Mom's crew and children themselves are each powerful in one way or another from what we've seen. So having this crew on Cracker's side proves to be a very beneficial and powerful ally to have. Additionally, when Cracker was defeated by Luffy, a whole entire army of Big Mom's crew were summoned to take Luffy down. So from that right there, you can see that this crew does not take things lightly. Big Mom also has a deep connection with the underworld similar to Doflamingo. What this connection consists of is currently unknown. However, the fact that she has ties to the underworld is enough to secure her, and in turn Cracker a higher role on the playing field. Other than this huge example, Cracker does not have any other known allies that we are aware of at least. But now that we've gone over everything, let's discuss why Cracker is one of the strongest, and why I placed him where I did on this list. Physically speaking, Cracker is a very weird case, because he is extremely powerful offensively. However, defensively, although he seems definitely way above average, I feel his defense is nowhere equal to his strength and offense. But with that being said, he can still take some of the most powerful attacks head on with no issue. And like I said earlier, what he lacks in defense, he makes up in stamina. And because his Devil Fruit takes a toll on his stamina with prolonged use, it is very beneficial for his stamina to be extra high, which it definitely is. And regarding his lack of defense, I feel he also makes up for it with his army of biscuit soldiers, who will continue to defend him whenever he chooses. So physically, I feel he is definitely one of the strongest, but once again, not close to the overall strongest. His intelligence is really something that surprised me, because he is very smart when it comes to the art of deception, which is something that isn't easy to do if you aren't very intelligent. And when it comes to deception, Cracker is some sort of genius, because he managed to fool the world government and the Marines with his false appearance for years. And with what we saw during his fight with Luffy, you can tell that he can easily think of ways to fool or throw off his opponent in a mere instant. So I would say that Cracker is definitely way above average when it comes to intelligence. His Haki is definitely top tier, and when it comes to armament Haki, I believe that Cracker is our strongest example of it so far, being able to easily overpower other proficient armament Haki users with no problem whatsoever. But since Cracker doesn't have access to the other two types of Haki, his full potential with Haki simply cannot be accessed. His Devil Fruit is a very interesting one to say the least, and Cracker has found ways to use it for his deceptive ways, for a great offense, a better defense, and more. The one downfall of the fruit is definitely that it takes a toll on Cracker with prolonged use, and I automatically consider that a bad thing considering that we have characters out there who can use their fruits to a better extent without causing problems to the user. On top of that, this fruit is also less useful in certain environments, so I think that also counts as a strike against this fruit. But that does not mean this is a bad fruit. The fact that Cracker can create a seemingly unlimited amount of these biscuits means that he basically has his own army ready to assault his enemies at any given moment. But because Cracker is also a master craftsman with these biscuits, I believe he could also transform these biscuits into other useful combat tools, such as different types of weapons, barriers, traps, and so on. Because of that, I also believe this fruit has even more unexplored potential, which is something I really like to see. Cracker can also apply Haki to his biscuits, which means not only do they become stronger and more durable, but they also now have the ability to hurt Logia users. So this Devil Fruit could easily go up against almost anyone. So I would give this Devil Fruit a solid 7 out of 10 with what we know about it right now. So it's by no means a bad Devil Fruit, but compared to some of the others that will be on this list, it falls a tad bit short. And finally, regarding his connections, I think it feels as if he doesn't have near as many as others on this list. But you also need to consider that there are probably plenty of allies we just don't know about. But when it comes to Big Mom and the allies she has gathered, Cracker pretty much has the biggest army we've seen at his disposal. And because Big Mom has done nothing but marry allies into her crew, we can safely assume she has some of the most powerful allies ready to help her and Cracker at any given time. So not only is her crew enormous, but they are also probably one of the most powerful. Additionally, with her ties to the underworld and for instance the Fishman Pirates, there is even more than meets the eye. So I definitely say that Cracker has some of the best allies on his side. And they are also something that other characters characters we've explored so far don't have on their side other than the underworld, giving Cracker an edge. So how does Cracker hold up when compared to the other characters we've looked at so far, and how is he superior to them? Well, compared to Luffy, I feel like Cracker has the edge when it comes to raw physical power, but his defense is not quite as good as Luffy's. But also, since they were both able to continue fighting for that 11 hours, it's safe to say that both of their stamina is pretty great. Cracker is definitely more intelligent than Luffy, and his armament haki is far superior to his. However, Luffy does have access to the other two types of haki, giving him a variety and a little bit of an edge. In terms of devil fruits, I would say that Cracker's is honestly better or about the same in usefulness compared to Luffy, because Luffy's is a little more versatile from what we've seen, and Cracker's does have a couple downfalls like his biscuits being caught in the rain, whereas Luffy's doesn't have many downfalls other than that it takes a huge toll on his body. And so does Cracker's with prolonged use, but luckily for Cracker, his does not harm his well-being, it just wears him out if nothing else. So I would call it a stalemate because they both have their pros and cons. And regarding their connections, I would say that Luffy has some pretty powerful allies, but Cracker's connection to Big Mom gives him more allies, and sometimes numbers is all you need. But you also have to remember that Big Mom has some very powerful people in her crew, a lot of which we probably don't even know about, so Cracker's allies might even be more powerful than Luffy's. But when it comes down to Luffy versus Cracker in a fight, I honestly think that Luffy beating Cracker in the story is yet another instance of Luffy's plot armor, to be honest. If Nami wasn't there to aid Luffy in softening Cracker's soldiers for Luffy to eat, Luffy would have been toast. Especially because Cracker would have been able to cut off Luffy's arm with haki even when Luffy was in Gear 4th, which shows just how powerful Cracker is. So because of all that, I believe that Cracker is stronger than Luffy. Now regarding Kuzon, I feel like Ice would probably be pretty effective against the Biscuit soldiers to slow them down, but we can't know for sure obviously. Although if Doflamingo was able to break through the ice without any help, I feel Cracker would probably be able to do the same thing no problem. So I imagine that freezing Cracker himself wouldn't be very effective. Cracker's haki and physical abilities are also far greater than Kuzon's from what I can tell, and regarding his allies, I feel like even though Kuzon is allied with Blackbeard, that alliance wouldn't be enough to take down Big Mom's crew. So Kuzon is definitely taking the L on this one. And finally for Doflamingo, my main deciding factor would be the fact that Big Mom was extremely confident that Cracker could defeat Luffy, knowing full well that he took down Doflamingo. So either Big Mom knows nothing about Doflamingo, or she really underestimated him, or she knows for a fact that Cracker is stronger than Doflamingo. But considering Big Mom has connections to the underworld, I think it's safe to say she knows a great deal about him. And honestly, it was hard for me to place Cracker above Doflamingo because I feel like in almost every aspect these two characters are even, or one of them has a slight edge. For instance, physically Cracker has the edge offensively and Doflamingo has the edge defensively. I feel like Doflamingo is more intelligent than Cracker, but I feel like Cracker is still intelligent enough to fool even Doflamingo in a fight. In terms of haki, Cracker has much more powerful armament haki than Doflamingo, but Doflamingo also has Conqueror's haki, giving him a better variety and showing more willpower. In terms of devil fruits, I feel that Doflamingo would probably prevail against the biscuits, but I also feel Cracker could use armament haki with his biscuits to block Doflamingo's strings, but we don't know for sure, so I could be wrong about that. So I'll give the edge to Doflamingo in terms of devil fruit abilities. And connections wise, they are close to equal in my book because they both have a Yonko on their side and ties to the underworld, but Doflamingo does have the power of a world noble to use as well. But this is where things get interesting to me, because what if Big Mom has a world noble allied into her crew? It would give Cracker the same exact tools through his allies. Obviously not quite to the same extent, but I also think Cracker may have more powerful allies simply because of how massive Big Mom's crew is, and simply how many powerful allies are in it, especially those we haven't seen yet. So in regards to their connections, I would like to call these two pretty much even in that aspect. So Doflamingo and Cracker are very, very close in terms of how powerful they really are. But I honestly just think that with everything we know about Cracker, he would be able to take down Doflamingo. It wouldn't be easy, in fact it would be very, very hard for him. But I know he would be able to do it with the information we've went over. I also think that because Big Mom was able to confidently say Luffy would be easy for Cracker to defeat, knowing full well the extent of what Doflamingo can do and being defeated by Luffy, that there is even more to Cracker than meets the eye. So because of all of that, Cracker is the 7th strongest character in One Piece. Number 6, Marco the Phoenix. To begin, Marco is very well rounded when it comes to his physical abilities, having a lot to offer for each area. Regarding his physical strength, he is definitely very strong, and he generally uses a fighting style that involves a lot of kicking. These kicks are also proven strong enough to kick both Kizaru and Kuzon hard enough to the point where they flew a great distance away. Regarding his normal physical defense, we don't get to see much of it because of how he usually defends himself with his Devil Fruit ability, but we'll talk about that later. Although regarding his defense, Marco was able to take a powerful hit from Garp head on and crash into the ground without taking much damage. So we have seen that Marco can easily take a hit. He also possesses great endurance and stamina, being able to take multiple direct hits from Kizaru's laser beams while he was unable to defend himself because his Devil Fruit ability was shut down with Sea Prism Stone handcuffs. Yet after all these laser attacks, he was still able to get back up. And lastly, he also possesses incredible speed, being able to quickly get from one place to another, such as when he defended Whitebeard from Kizaru's laser attack in only a matter of seconds. So although in terms of his physical abilities, his defense is his weak point, he more than makes up for it with his Devil Fruit ability, which we will soon discuss. But otherwise, physically, Marco is definitely very well rounded and very strong, making his physical abilities useful in almost every situation, and allowing him to fight toe-to-toe with some of the strongest characters in the series. In regards to his intelligence, Marco is what I would like to call moderately intelligent from what we've seen about his character. It's hard to classify because Marco hasn't really shown any signs of stupidity or any signs of being very intelligent. So in terms of intelligence, I would like to say he is just your average man. But since we also don't know much about his intelligence, I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he's smarter than your average person. Marco does know how to think fast and react quickly during a fight, along with how to properly execute his attacks at a moment's notice, and he's also very perceptive. So I would like to think that because he has such a quick mind, he would be smarter than your average person, but to be fair, since we can only assume, we'll just say that he's somewhere between average and above average intelligence. When it comes to his Haki, we know that Marco is able to use Armament Haki, and he is able to use it pretty proficiently. In fact, he was able to successfully use his Haki to kick away both Kizaru and Kuzon, whom are both Logia users and can only be physically forced to be tangible through the use of Armament Haki. Marco also hit Sakazuki with a Haki imbued attack, but all it did was irritate him. So from this, we can likely assume that Sakazuki's Haki is just some sort of next level shit. Because being the successor of Whitebeard's crew, who was a Yonko, we can assume that Marco is on a similar level to Whitebeard himself. Maybe not quite on Whitebeard's level, but he's still pretty close. So with that, we can also assume that his ability to use Haki is definitely much stronger than it appears. However, since Marco cannot use Conqueror's Haki or Observation Haki, he does lack variety. Now, onto his Devil Fruit, which, let me just say, his Devil Fruit is one of the main reasons I believe Marco deserves to be on this list. Although the Devil Fruit itself has not been officially named, it is one of the only two currently revealed mythical Zoan Devil Fruits, and it allows Marco to turn into a phoenix. Like all normal Zoan Devil Fruits, this one gives Marco increased physical abilities, and it also gives him the ability to fly. When he transforms into the phoenix, his feet also transform into talons, which he can use to slash his enemies. And since he can fly, these talons also come in handy for aerial attacks. Just like most other Zoan users, Marco also has a human beast form where he can transform into a mixture of his human and phoenix form. However, unlike other Zoans, Marco can choose where he wants his body to transform at will. So for instance, if he wanted his head to transform into the phoenix while the rest of his body remains in human form, he could do that. Marco generally just chooses to transform his arms into wings so he can still use his powerful kicks on his enemy. And Marco also occasionally likes to transform his arms and legs, but keep his torso and head in his human form. Now, so far this might just sound like your average Zoan Devil Fruit, but it gets much, much better. This fruit also has an additional 2 different abilities that make it seem like a Zoan, Logia, and a Paramecia Devil Fruit all in one. And these abilities come from the blue flames the Phoenix emits. You see, these flames allow Marco to regenerate any wounds he receives. Because of this, Marco is able to take enormous amounts of damage and still come out as if he was never hurt in the first place. Also, since Marco can generate these flames selectively on his body, he can also heal whichever parts he wants whenever he wants. And the process of regeneration regeneration takes only a matter of seconds. So because he has this regeneration ability, his fruit also has the characteristic of a Paramecia Devil Fruit, which is very useful. This regeneration ability is essentially his ultimate defense, like I was talking about earlier. Because any hit Marco can take, he can also heal instantly, meaning that he must have some high pain tolerance and endurance to be able to take so many hits, even if they only hurt him for a moment. And the reason this fruit also appears to have some Logia capabilities is because it appears as though attacks can pass right through him when he is in his Phoenix form. We first saw this when Marco flew up to the execution platform while being shot multiple times by Marines, and each bullet passed right through him and didn't seem to affect him whatsoever. However, shortly after he was struck down from a punch by Garp, which was more than likely infused with Haki. So this fruit is so unique because it has the characteristics of a Zoan, Logia, and Paramecia, making it one of the most useful devil fruits of all time. And finally, let's talk about his connections. His biggest and most notable ally was definitely Whitebeard before his death. Although since Whitebeard is dead, this can no longer count as an ally. But since Whitebeard's death, Marco has taken over as the captain of the Whitebeard crew. So although Whitebeard is dead, his crew still remains as Marco's most notable ally. Which this crew was made up of 1,600 men, and I do imagine that many of these men fell at the Battle of Marineford or have since left the crew. But I'm willing to bet at least 400 of them remain, which is still quite a few. On top of that, Whitebeard also had 43 different crews who were serving under him. So I'm willing to bet that Marco still has at least half of these crews as his allies, even if they don't directly serve under him. And they would be willing to help him if need be. So already Marco has a crew and potentially a fleet on his side, along with great influence. Jinbei and the Fishman Pirates are also allies of Whitebeard, meaning that they are likely now allies of Marco. And on top of that, he also now has Luffy as an ally. And as we stated earlier, Luffy has a great deal of allies on his side, giving Marco a much bigger set of connections from the ones he already has. And finally, although I wouldn't exactly call them allies, Marco is on good terms with the Yonko Shanks, meaning that if the two had some sort of common enemy, they would probably be more than willing to help each other out. So although he may not have the most powerful allies on his side, he still has some very powerful ones. Although, it should also be noted that since Blackbeard defeated the Whitebeard pirates along with Marco during the time skip, his current whereabouts or status are currently unknown, meaning that a lot of his allies also could have perished. So even if it may seem like Marco is lacking a bit compared to some of the other characters we've discussed, I do have to disagree and say there's much more to him than meets the eye. Marco was the first division commander in a Yonko's crew, meaning that he had to be nothing but the best to achieve that role. Physically, Marco is very strong and pretty well rounded, and as we discussed, he does have the ultimate defense. So although Marco is lacking a bit in physical defense, he does not need a good physical defense. But considering that Marco does have the ultimate defense on his side, it in turn leads to some amazing endurance and pain tolerance on his part. And Marco may not have the same monster strength as say Doflamingo or Cracker, but at the same time he could also be just as strong and we just haven't seen his full potential. Intelligence wise, I don't believe he would beat a character like Doflamingo or maybe even Cracker in a battle of brains, but I think he would do pretty well because of his ability to quickly think and react to the situation at hand. Marco is by no means an unintelligent character, and because of that, like I said, I think he's slightly above average, if not a bit better. Marco's Haki is something we didn't really get to see a whole lot of because Haki was just being developed at that point in the story. But from what we've seen him do versus what characters in the series can do now, I believe that Marco's Haki is much better than it appears to be. Even so, he was still able to inflict damage on 2 of the 3 admirals at the time, which are all Logia users. So the fact that his Haki was enough to injure some of the most powerful characters is still very impressive. Although since he only has access to armament Haki, he is lacking in variety. But if I had to compare his armament Haki to someone else, I would say it's probably closest to Doflamingo's level. But for all we know, it could be much better than that, or much worse. Now, when it comes to his Devil Fruit ability, I would say that so far on this list, Marco has the best one by a long shot. Previously, I would have said Doflamingo's fruit took the cake, but Marco's fruit wouldn't even let him have a piece in comparison. All Zoan users get an automatic strength boost, so this makes Marco physically much stronger than before, pushing him ahead of other characters on this list in terms of physical strength. And he also has the ability to fly, but Marco is also not limited like Doflamingo with clouds. On top of that, he is able to let attacks pass through him like a Logia, whereas Kuzon's ability is not tangible and still needs to be struck, and for his Paramecia fire-like abilities because he can use his flames to heal any part of his body at any given time. And since this ability is regeneration, I'm also willing to bet that Marco could regenerate, say, his whole arm if it were to get cut off, making him practically invincible. Of course, Marco is still able to feel pain and get hurt, but he will be good as new in only a matter of seconds. So with his great endurance and pain tolerance, this fruit is perfect for Marco, and is without a doubt the very best devil fruit on this list so far, giving him a major advantage over other characters. And regarding his connections, at this point in the story, I will admit he falls a bit short compared to other characters, but he also has another character on this list, Luffy, on his side, meaning that the two could join their forces if need be, giving Marco a huge edge, and even giving Luffy more of an edge for that matter. But I will say, since Marco's connections took a big hit with the war, his biggest downfall in terms of strength is his connections, which is the main reason why I won't be able to put him any higher on this list. So because of all that, I believe Marco the Phoenix is the 6th strongest character in One Piece. Number 5. Jack the Drought. Let's begin with his physical abilities. And let me just say, Jack is without a doubt the physically strongest character on this list so far. To put that into perspective, let's talk about how he received his nickname, the Drought. Well, whenever Jack decides to rampage on an island, it is said to be left in such a devastating, decaying state that it looks as if the island was suffering a drought. Without even looking at what he can do, we also know Jack is very powerful, because he is one of the 3 disasters, which are the Yonko Kaido's 3 right-hand men and possibly women. And to be strong enough to stand directly below a Yonko definitely implies that he is one of the strongest characters in the series. But the reason I wanted to bring this up is because just like Smoothie and Katakuri from Big Mom's Sweet Commanders, we know little to nothing about these other 2 disasters. But from what we know about Jack, we can only assume that these other 2 disasters will be just as powerful as him, or maybe even stronger. So if we knew more about these other 2 disasters, or anything about them for that matter, I would be willing to bet that they would also be on this list. So in addition to Jack, I would like to give the other 2 disasters an honorable mention. And we know literally nothing about them, but I would guess that they would be right around the same number as Jack on this list. So now back to Jack. His physical strength, endurance, and stamina are also off the charts, as we saw Jack fighting the Mink tribe's leaders for 5 days and 5 nights, without taking a single break or really suffering any injuries. While Jack himself was constantly fighting, the 2 Mink leaders had to take turns fighting Jack, however. Another testament to his strength was the fact that when he went after the marine warships to rescue Doflamingo, Jack himself completely destroyed 2 of the 4 ships. Unfortunately though, due to the fact he was overpowered by 5 powerful characters who were on those ships, which were 3 Vice Admirals, Admiral Fujitora, and the former Fleet Admiral Sengoku. So needless to say, it makes sense to me at least that these characters ganging up on Jack was enough to suppress him. However, after this fight, even though the news reported Jack was dead, Jack more than survived, and only received a few minor injuries. Another testament to his strength would have to be the fact that he was hit with Zunisha's gigantic trunk and still survived. And finally, Jack also has the ability to survive underwater for very long periods of time, which is something that we have yet to see with any other Devil Fruit user in the series. The reason why this is possible is currently unknown, but it appears as if he's just really good at holding his breath when he's angry. So from this, we can clearly see that Jack has some great lung capacity, or some other great physical trait. But to sum it all up, Jack is an absolute monster. Moving on to his intelligence, I have no problem saying that Jack is not an intelligent character, and that is his biggest flaw. The only thing that is ever on his mind is absolute destruction. All Jack is out to do is get his way and then destroy everything else. Jack is a very quick-tempered character who will use any method possible to do whatever it is he sets out to do, such as when his crew suggested they not attempt to rescue Doflamingo because he is so heavily guarded. But because Jack is so level-headed, he completely refused to listen and did it anyway. And although Jack caused a lot of destruction, he was ultimately defeated. So this right here just shows he won't even listen or comprehend logic. So from this, I would say that Jack does not have a lot of intelligence, but he is by no means completely dumb. Instead, his mind is just corrupt with madness. Moving on to his ability to use Haki, we actually have no idea if Jack is capable of using Haki, and normally this would be a huge downfall, but I would like to give Jack the benefit of the doubt. I feel like being as powerful as he is, we can deduce one of 2 things. Either A, Jack has Haki and just hasn't used it yet, because I mean, think about it. The guy is the right hand of the Yonko Kaido himself. It would be a little bit odd if he was that high up on the food chain and couldn't use haki. The Sweet Commanders, or at the very least Cracker, can use haki, and he is at the same prestige as Jack, but in the Yonko Big Mom's crew. And his haki is the strongest we've seen thus far. So I would be willing to bet that Jack has at the very least armament haki, and his haki is on the same level as Cracker's. However, if he does have haki and it isn't quite as strong as Cracker's, I could see it being on the same level as Doflamingo's armament haki. And what I mean by that is, since the individual is already physically very strong, their haki doesn't really boost their attacks too much at all. So I would be willing to bet that Jack does have haki, and my other possibility, B, would be that Jack does not have the ability to use haki. But even if he doesn't have haki, he honestly doesn't need it either, because he is literally physically stronger than any other character we've seen so far. So I feel like that even if we find out Jack doesn't have the ability to use haki, I really wouldn't think of it as a bad thing in Jack's case, but compared to other characters on this list, it is a bit of a downfall. But for now, we're just going to assume that Jack does have haki and we just haven't seen it yet. Regarding his devil fruit, Jack ate the Zozo no Mi model Mammoth, which is an ancient Zoan devil fruit that allows Jack to transform into a mammoth, or human-mammoth hybrid. Like all Zoan devil fruits, this one gives the user increased strength. And in Jack's case, he gains a lot of strength. In his mammoth form, Jack grows much bigger than his already huge build. Jack also leaves footprints in the ground just by walking. And Jack can level multiple buildings with a single swing of his trunk. And once he starts rampaging, he can destroy pretty much everything in his path. The one downfall of this fruit, however, is the fact that Jack becomes very slow due to his massive size. So faster characters will be able to land high-speed attacks much easier because Jack is too slow to dodge or block. This is by no means the best devil fruit, but considering it gives Jack the ability to become much stronger than he already was, I must say I'm impressed. Additionally, I imagine that while he is in this form, he also increases his defense and endurance just due to his sheer size. So even if you were fast enough to land multiple attacks on Jack, he honestly might not even feel it unless you have a lot of power behind it too. So because this devil fruit turns Jack into even more of a powerhouse, I give it a thumbs up. And finally, on to Jack's connections. Jack's biggest and most notable ally is of course the Yonko Kaido, who is regarded as the strongest creature in the world. So having an ally to someone who is stronger than Jack himself is definitely a big plus. But on top of that, since Jack himself is one of Kaido's right-hand men, Jack has authority over anyone below himself, and therefore can command the majority of Kaido's crew, leading Jack to essentially have a whole fleet at his command. Kaido also has many other powerful allies such as X-Drake and the Drake Pirates, Scratchman Apu, and Doflamingo. And because Kaido has ties with Doflamingo, he also has ties to the underworld, where he would purchase his smiles. So because these are allied to Kaido, they are also allied to Jack. So Jack has some very powerful allies on his side, and because of that, you should definitely never mess with him. Now, why did I place Jack as number 5 on this list and not higher? Because he is really powerful. Well, Jack is without a doubt the physically strongest character on this list so far, and his strength alone would be enough to overpower everyone previously on the list. And his physical strength is also further increased with his Devil Fruit ability, meaning that it is very beneficial to Jack, helping him destroy islands, kill people, and whatever else he wants to use it for. Jack also has a very powerful set of allies on his side, although I don't think he would ever let them help him, simply because Jack seems like the kind of person who doesn't work too well with others. But out of these 3 things, his strength beats the rest of the list so far. His Devil Fruit is equal if not better than some of them, like for instance, since it shows no signs of physically harming Jack with use or with certain techniques so far, it is automatically better than Luffy and Cracker's Devil Fruits. And he has some of the most powerful connections so far on this list, but definitely not the most powerful. But even though these characteristics are definitely some of the best we've seen, he does have 2 downfalls, which are his haki, or lack of, and his intelligence. For his haki, I won't repeat myself too much, but I personally believe Jack has the ability to use haki and we just haven't seen him do it yet. So I don't really want to count his haki as a downfall quite yet. But I just want to make it really clear right now that if Jack ends up not being able to use haki, I will take back what I said. But for now, I'm willing to likely say he can use it very proficiently. Now with his intelligence, that is a different story, because I feel like Jack would not do very well in a fight against Doflamingo or Cracker, because they would be able to easily use their intelligence to get the best of him. In a game of minds, I feel like Jack would lose every time. and because of that main fact, I simply cannot place him any higher on this list. But I will also refuse to put him any lower, because Jack's overwhelming strength alone is enough to overlook his weakness. So because of all that, I believe that Jack the Drought is the 5th strongest character in One Piece. Number 4. Dracule Hawkeye's Mihawk. Regarding his physical abilities, they are nothing short of amazing. Mihawk is called the greatest swordsman in the world of One Piece, and there's a good reason for it. So in terms of hand-to-hand combat or fist-to-fist, we have yet to see him show his skills, but his true strength lies behind his swordsmanship. And from his abilities with a sword, we've seen time and time again that he possesses superhuman strength. To begin, Mihawk has 2 different swords that we've seen him use. The first is Kogatana, which is basically Mihawk's butter knife that he wears around his neck and uses it to eat. But if he also deems his opponent unworthy, he will use this weapon against them. And you may think, well, what the hell could he do to me with a butter knife? Well, let me just say even a mere butter knife is a deadly weapon in the hands of the greatest swordsman in the world. And we know that because he was able to easily defeat Roanoa Zoro back in East Blue. And Zoro was by no means weak back then. So the fact that Mihawk was able to take him down with such a puny weapon is super impressive. And his second weapon is his legendary sword, Yoru, which is a gigantic, 7-foot tall black blade in the shape of a crucifix. Because this sword is so huge and Mihawk can still swing it with both immense strength and speed, we can easily see that he is a physical powerhouse. And with this sword, Mihawk can cause some serious damage, such as when he single-handedly took out 50 ships and over 5,000 men by himself when he went after Don Krieg, and right before a vicious storm for that matter. Another thing that should be noted is that during his first appearance to the audience, he cut a humongous ship in half with a single swing of his sword. So Mihawk was able to cut through a ton of wood, steel, and more with just one swing. Additionally, Mihawk has a number of different techniques that he can use with his sword, which are Kokudo Isen, which is where Mihawk swings his sword to create a gigantic invisible flying slash attack that can cut through anything and everything in its path. We saw this technique at Marineford and it was able to cut a gigantic iceberg completely in half. Kokudo Kogetsu, which is where Mihawk slashes his sword so quickly that it creates some sort of cutting energy that can also seemingly cut through anything. However, this cutting energy does not travel a great range. Kokudo Saku, which is a counterattack that Mihawk uses by grabbing his sword while it's on his back with both hands. He then waits for his opponent to get close before launching a light speed downward slash at his opponent. Chi Wo Hao Zangeki, which is where Mihawk creates a downward slash so fast and powerful that it creates more cutting energy that travels a great speed through the ground. And from this attack we also learned that this cutting energy is powerful enough to cut through steel, as it easily took down Mr. One. And finally, this last attack is unnamed but was called the world's strongest slash by a Marine. Mihawk used this technique to gauge his power in comparison to Whitebeard, and sent a giant flying slash attack towards him. It traveled very quickly and had enough power behind it to cut through tons of ice. But this attack was stopped by Diamond Jozu. So from this we can either assume that Mihawk can cut through Diamond, but he was not expecting to need to cut through Diamond so he held back his true power, or he is not strong enough to cut through Diamond. And as the final testament to his strength, Mihawk also used to have legendary duels with the Yonko Shanks, and saw him as a worthy rival. The fact that Mihawk is able to go up against someone at that level of power by itself is amazing, but the fact that they fought near equal truly shows how strong Mihawk really is. Aside from his strength, Mihawk also has amazing eyesight, being able to easily track Luffy while he was using his gear second speed in the middle of a chaotic battlefield, and being able to pinpoint his exact location and release a long-ranged slash at Luffy while so much chaos was happening around them. Now that's impressive. Mihawk is also so skilled with his eyesight and swordsmanship that he is able to block bullets with his sword or even change the trajectory of the bullets with the flat part of the blade. It is unknown if his amazing eyesight has anything to do with his Hawkeyes themselves, or if he possesses observation haki. Moving on to his intelligence, Mihawk is definitely one of the most intelligent characters on this list, mainly shown in his analytical fighting style and decision making. Mihawk is very good at judging someone's strength and knowing when he needs to test them. For instance, he was able to judge that Zoro was nowhere near his own power and therefore used his butter knife against him, or when Mihawk was unsure how strong Whitebeard was compared to his own strength. So he sent a flying slash attack at him as a test. Mihawk clearly knows his own strength and capabilities, and that is one of his greatest assets, because he also knows when he is in over his head and should back down. He is also skilled enough to travel around the Grand Line in nothing more than a coffin-shaped raft with one sail all by himself, showing that he is also able to navigate the seas easily. And the final testament of his intellect involves his teachings, which we will get to momentarily. But overall, Mihawk is a very smart character who knows his own limits and is good at seeing the potential in others, making him even more dangerous. Next, we'll talk about his haki, which unfortunately we have not seen him use. However, Mihawk did teach Zoro how to use and infuse armament haki into his swords over the time skip, which shows us that not only does Mihawk know how to use it, but he is also so proficient with it that he is able to teach it to someone else. And on top of that, I'm also willing to bet he can use observation haki, but we don't know for sure. But let's just put this into perspective. Mihawk is already one of the strongest characters we've talked about so far, and that is without him ever using haki. So imagine what he could possibly do if he imbued his sword with haki, for instance. I bet that with haki, Mihawk would be able to easily cut Diamond Jozu right in two. So the fact that he could improve his strength with haki, and he can use it so proficiently that he can teach it to another individual is very impressive. Next up, let's talk about his Devil Fruit. Oh, wait a second. That's right. Mihawk is so far the only character on this list that does not have a Devil Fruit, which means that he has the ability to swim unlike all the rest. Definitely a plus. However, two things I want to bring up is that Mihawk is strong enough with his sword to the point where he would never need a Devil Fruit, and if he were to eat one, it would just potentially make him weaker. And the other thing I want to bring up is that some people out there do believe that Mihawk has already ate a Devil Fruit, but personally I think that's a load of crap. So I guess we'll have to see. But for now, we are going with the assumption that he has not eaten one. And finally, let's talk about his connections, which honestly, he doesn't have very many. He was formerly a rival to Shanks, but since Shanks lost his arm, Mihawk wants nothing to do with him. But I guess the two are still somewhat friendly. And Mihawk is also currently allied with the world government because he himself is a Shichibukai. But Mihawk only really allies himself with them when it is convenient for both the world government and himself. So calling the world government an ally to Mihawk is a bit far-fetched when it comes down to needing the world government's help for a change. Mihawk also has a connection with Perona, who I think would fight by his side if need be. So I mean, it's something. But at the same time, this lack of allies also works in Mihawk's favor, because he is more of a lone wolf. He fights alone, travels alone, and that's just the way he likes it. Mihawk is what I would consider a one-man army, even up against some of the toughest foes. So although I do need to give him the L when it comes to having powerful allies, in his case it kinda works out because he wants to work alone. But sometimes you also can't always do things by yourself. So why do I think Mihawk is more powerful than the other characters previously listed? Well, to put it simply, Mihawk is a very special case in this series. He is physically a superhuman. His strength alone is enough to cut through almost anything with a sword in his hands. His speed is equal, if not faster, than someone like Luffy, who is incredibly fast with some of their techniques. He has incredible eyesight and observation skills, being able to quickly pick out everything in his surroundings, and even pick out his target like a needle in a haystack. He is also considered the greatest swordsman in the world, a title that is by far something that's not easy to obtain. Just imagine how many people must try and challenge him for that title, and what Mihawk had to accomplish to get that title in the first place. Also, something that I want to bring up is that so far Mihawk is the only character on this list that has yet to receive even one little scratch, meaning that he is one of the best if nobody can even land a hit on him. He is also a very smart character, being able to analyze any situation or character and execute a plan accordingly. He is also smart and skilled enough to teach haki, showing that he is also very proficient with it himself. It may also be a downfall to some that he doesn't have a Devil Fruit, but Mihawk is so strong on his own that he will just never need one. And finally, I must say his lack of connections is really his only big flaw. So compared to Luffy, Mihawk is the obvious winner in terms of strength and intelligence. When it comes to Haki, I feel like Mihawk is probably better at it, but we also don't exactly have any examples. I would like to say that if Cracker was almost able to cut off Luffy's arm while he was in Gear 4th, that the greatest swordsman in the world would be able to do it without a second thought. Because although Cracker isn't bad with a sword by any means, he's not even close to Mihawk's level. So personally, I would put Mihawk's Haki above Luffy until proven otherwise. And although Mihawk doesn't have a Devil Fruit, he proved at the Battle of Marineford that he would not need one to take Luffy down. But if for some reason he did need one, Mihawk could always just swim out to sea where Luffy can't get him. And in regards to connections, Mihawk will lose pretty much every time. But since he excels in everything else, Mihawk surpasses Luffy. Compared to Kuzan, I feel like Mihawk would still be able to defeat him. When it comes to physical abilities, Kuzan is indeed very powerful, but he is definitely not strong enough to stop a sword slash from Mihawk. Mihawk is also more intelligent, so he would be able to easily counteract anything Kuzan throws at him. And since Mihawk is able to use Haki, Kuzan also isn't safe to use his Logia abilities for defense. We've also seen that Mihawk has no problem cutting through the ice Kuzan creates, as we saw him cut through it easily multiple times during the Battle of Marineford. So Kuzan is definitely at the disadvantage, except even Kuzan has stronger allies. So I guess Kuzan's got that going for him if nothing else. Compared to Doflamingo, I feel the two would have a very interesting fight, because I feel like Mihawk may be one of the few people who could actually cut through Doflamingo's strings with his sword, but we'll likely never know for sure if that's actually possible. But the two are very similar with both strength and intelligence, although when it comes to Haki, I feel like Mihawk would have the upper hand, because I believe his Haki abilities would be something above even Cracker's abilities. Doflamingo's Devil Fruit would definitely be a problem for Mihawk to deal with. But I don't think it's enough to defeat Mihawk by any means, especially if Mihawk is able to cut the strings. But because Mihawk has such good eyesight, he would be able to easily see the strings and find a way to get around them or block them or whatever else. And finally, once again, unfortunately for Mihawk, Doflamingo has the better connections, so Mihawk falls short on that end. In regards to Cracker, I feel like they are both equal in strength. Mihawk has equal or better Haki to Cracker from what I stated earlier, and in terms of intelligence, although Cracker is very deceptive, I think Mihawk would have the edge because he is more observant, and would be able to easily see through these deceptions. And in regards to Cracker's Devil Fruit ability, I feel like his biscuit soldiers would be like cake for Mihawk to take care of, no matter how many Cracker produced. And finally, once again, Mihawk's only flaw compared to Cracker is his connections. Next up is Marco the Phoenix. Now, this one comes pretty close, as I'll explain. But even so, Mihawk still comes out on top in my opinion. So in regards to strength, Marco is definitely very powerful, even without the boost from his Zoan Fruit. But Mihawk is definitely stronger. Being able to effortlessly cut through steel is something I can't see Marco being able to do. Intelligence-wise, Marco also falls short, because since Mihawk is so observant and analytical, while Marco is not, Mihawk would be able to counteract anything Marco threw at him. In regards to Haki, I feel like Marco is a lot better than what was shown, but I still feel like Mihawk has him beat as well. Now with his Devil Fruit, this is where things get a little tricky, because I feel like Mihawk would have a very, very hard time with this since Marco can regenerate at will. So even if Mihawk were to deal some serious damage to Marco, that damage is likely not permanent. But with that being said, if it really came down to it, I feel like Mihawk may try to chop Marco into a ton of pieces while using Haki to try and defeat him. But who knows, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But I also feel that Marco's attacks wouldn't be enough to stop Mihawk, which leads me to call this one a stalemate, because we simply don't know how that fight would play out. And finally, Mihawk loses in terms of useful allies once again. Now finally, when compared to Jack the Drought, I think this one is also very close. Jack is definitely as strong, or probably stronger than Mihawk, because they both have the ability to destroy pretty much anything they come in contact with. But in terms of overall physical ability, Mihawk has amazing eyesight to help him see through Jack's attacks, and Mihawk also has great speed, whereas Jack is very slow, which I would say gives him the edge physically, but not by much. Intelligence-wise, I don't even really need to explain myself because Jack is not a very intelligent character. In terms of haki, since we haven't really seen anything from either character, we'll just assume that since they're around the same level of power, their haki would be about equal. Now, for Jack's Devil Fruit, although he becomes much stronger, I feel like since he also becomes very slow, Mihawk would have the edge because he can move very quickly. But since Jack is also much stronger in this form, if he did manage to hit him, Mihawk might be done for. So for this one, I also want to call it a stalemate. And finally for connections, Mihawk takes the L once again. So as you can see, Mihawk only comes out on top by a very narrow margin compared to Jack, which is why I placed him above Jack, but no higher than that. I feel like, as you can see, Mihawk is fitting for his name as the greatest swordsman in the world. But when it comes to Mihawk's allies, that's where he will lose every time. So because of that, Mihawk is the 4th strongest character in One Piece. Number 3. Borsalino. Before we get started, I just want to clarify to you guys right now that I'm going to be referring to him as Kizaru because it's easier for me to say. Physically, Kizaru is a monster. Being the rank of Admiral means that he is one of the Marines' strongest fighters, and he definitely shows that he is. His strength alone is enormous. For instance, he is able to hold down Whitebeard's Bisento with just 1 foot. And considering that Whitebeard was the strongest man in the world, it's a real accomplishment to achieve that. Additionally, Kizaru was able to fight one-on-one with the former Yonko on pretty much equal footing. Most of his attacks are kick-based in conjunction with his Devil Fruit abilities, but his kicks alone are also something to fear. Additionally, he was also able to fight against Silver's Rayleigh until their battle resulted in a stalemate, which, being able to go up against the former Pirate King's right-hand man, is a great accomplishment as well. And with this strength, I believe that Kizaru is by far one of the strongest. Kizaru also has amazing durability and endurance, as for instance, he was able to take a haki-imbued kick from Marco and got up without even a single scratch. Kizaru also has borderline superhuman hearing, as he was able to hear activity underwater before the war at Marineford took place. And finally, Kizaru has amazing precision and accuracy, mainly in conjunction with using his Devil Fruit ability, but you'll see what I mean later on. Next up is his intelligence, which is somewhat of a mystery to me. You see, Kizaru's personality is very hard to read, therefore so is his level of intelligence. Kizaru puts on this very lazy, calm nature, making him seem as though he's only moderately intelligent like Kuzan. He also tends to taunt his enemies during battle to try and aggravate them or get under their skin, which makes me think he's doing this as some sort of technique to overpower his enemies by making them lose their minds. Kizaru also appears to be very absent-minded and irresponsible when it comes to his way of justice, such as using so much force in 1 kick against some pirates that he ended up breaking part of a mangrove tree. So from all of this, it makes it seem as if he's rather dumb if nothing else. But honestly, I think this is all just an act on Kizaru's part so people don't figure out how smart he actually is, and instead he is using some sort of deceptive methods like Cracker for instance to fool his enemies, and even his allies for that matter. So because I can't figure out if he's actually a bit dumb or if he's actually very intelligent, let's just settle in the middle saying he's average or slightly above average.
Oh. Sentomaru-kun.
In regards to his haki, since he is above the rank of Vice Admiral, we know for a fact that he can use it. And we also know that to achieve the rank of Admiral, his haki must be something on another level. The only instance of haki we've seen Kizaru use so far is when he used Armament Haki in conjunction with the other 3 Admirals to create a shield. So much like what I said about Kuzan, it has been 2 years since then, so his haki has without a doubt become even stronger. And I also imagine it was a lot stronger to begin with. But since haki was just being introduced in that part of the story, there was still a lot we didn't know, and a lot that was yet to be shown. So because of the level Kizaru is on already, I think it's safe to assume he has haki abilities comparable to someone like Doflamingo or better. But as far as we know, he can't use the other 2 types of haki, leading him to have a slight disadvantage with variety. Next up is his Devil Fruit, which is the Pika Pika no Mi, otherwise known as the Glint Glint Fruit. This fruit is a Logia type Devil Fruit, and it allows the user to create, control, and transform into light at will, making the user a light human. This devil fruit allows Kizaru to not only transform into light to avoid being hit, but to also create laser beams, travel at light speed, and even perform a partial transformation that connects physical attacks at light speed, which are extremely devastating attacks. Some of his techniques include Yata no Kagami, which is where Kizaru reflects light off of any surface he chooses, including places where the light doesn't touch. And after his reflections reach to the place where he wants them to go, he can travel to this reflected point at the speed of light. It should also be noted that with the speed of light on his side, Kizaru is currently the fastest man in One Piece, being able to travel 299,792,458 meters per second. So let's just say that Kizaru is very hard to catch. Amaterasu. Oh shit, hang on, that's the wrong one. Anyway, Amaterasu, which is where Kizaru points his finger into the air or at a specific enemy, and then emits a massive flash of light that is so bright it will blind his opponent and anyone in the near vicinity, meaning Kizaru has some useful ways of also stunning his enemies temporarily. Ama no Murakumo, which is where Kizaru creates a sword out of light, and then uses it as a weapon, pretty much. It should also be noted that this light is then solidified, meaning that it is no longer intangible and cannot be broken or passed through by Haki, at least with what we know currently. And Yasikani no Magatama, which is where Kizaru crosses his arms and fires a ton of laser particles all at once. Kizaru can also control their trajectory, being able to focus them on one single person or a whole area. These light particles also have great piercing power, as they were capable of piercing right through Kuzon's ice and deep into the ocean without losing speed or power. Kizaru can also create laser beams at will from his hands or feet that travel in a straight line. It should also be noted that since Kizaru himself is so fast, he can easily keep up with others who are quite quick. Because of that, he is very accurate and precise with where he fires his lasers, and it is very hard for him to miss his target considering how fast his lasers travel. Another thing that should be noted about this fruit is that Kizaru can transform his entire body into light at any given time and transport himself to a different location. So it is also very hard to land a hit on him if you don't know what you're doing or you just aren't fast enough. And since he can travel so quickly, his normal kicks also travel at that abnormal speed, leading to an insanely powerful kick. So overall, this fruit is definitely one that should be feared, and I'm willing to call it one of the best on this list. Regarding Kizaru's allies, he does not have a large variety, but he does have the world government and the Marines on his side. And considering that he is such a high-ranking member, he has a great deal of the Marines at his command. And since the world government and the Marines are such a massive entity, Kizaru has some of the strongest characters ready to fight by his side at a moment's notice, such as Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, Admiral Fujitora, and any of the Vice Admirals. Because Kizaru is also of such a high status, he can order a Buster Call, which is one of the most feared things in the world. Otherwise known as the world government's form of absolute justice, where they can wipe out entire islands if they need to. Currently, only a maximum of 10 people are able to initiate a Buster Call, so the fact that Kizaru has that kind of power because of his connections gives him an even bigger edge. Additionally, Kizaru can also give permission to a lower-ranking world government member to initiate one if the situation calls for it. So although besides the world government, Kizaru doesn't have a lot of other options, the world government is all he needs to have some of the strongest and most feared allies in the world. So what do I think of his abilities, and how does he compare to the other characters on this list? Well, in terms of his physical abilities, he is most definitely a monster. But for instance, he is not as strong as Jack physically, although his defense and durability are off the charts when it comes to the fact that even a Haki-imbued kick wouldn't leave a scratch on him. Additionally, with the added defense of being able to turn into light and let attacks bypass through him, or even turn into light and quickly move out of the way to dodge attacks, I would say that Kizaru definitely has the best defensive capabilities so far. And since he is the fastest man in the world of One Piece, he also outspeeds everyone else on this list, making him much more dangerous. So other than his physical strength by itself being inferior to Jack, Kizaru is the strongest when it comes to his physical abilities and beats all of the other characters so far. In terms of intelligence, like I said, Kizaru is very hard to read, but I personally don't believe that he is unintelligent by any means. In fact, I personally believe he is much smarter than he lets on. But since we are unsure of his actual intelligence, I'm just going to say he's slightly above average, meaning that other characters such such as Doflamingo, Cracker, and Mihawk beat him in terms of intellect. But I'm also not sure if their minds could move fast enough to comprehend how fast Kizaru is moving. Although they do contain the mental capacity to outsmart him if he is indeed not as smart as I think. So although Kizaru isn't the best in terms of intelligence, he still beats characters like Luffy, Jack, and Kuzon. In terms of hockey, since he is an admiral in the Marines, his hockey must be much better than what we got to see. And I imagine his hockey being around the same level as Cracker. But since we don't know for sure, it's hard to gauge exactly how powerful it is. Although we can also assume that after the time skip, his hockey has no doubt improved, meaning that Kizaru is even stronger than he was before. So overall, I'm going to say that Kizaru has the same level of hockey as Cracker or Doflamingo until proven otherwise, which in turn means he beats many of the characters on this list. Moving on to his Devil Fruit, it is without a doubt the second best on this list, beaten only by Marco the Phoenix. But unfortunately for Marco, Kizaru beats him in every other aspect besides his Devil Fruit, meaning Marco takes the L for this one. But with a fruit this powerful, Kizaru is capable of many things. I feel like since his lasers are so powerful, he can easily overpower almost every character on this list, along with the speed his Devil Fruit gives him. It makes it so pretty much everyone on this list is hopeless in taking him down. I feel like Mihawk would definitely have a solid chance, since he has such great eyesight, mental, and physical skills, but at the same time this amount of speed may just be too much for him to handle. So I would say if the two were to fight one-on-one, it would be very hard to imagine who would come out on top. But even though the two are pretty much neck and neck, Kizaru does beat Mihawk in one thing, which would be his connections. So because the two are evenly matched in almost every other category, it only makes sense that Kizaru would be above him due to his connections and influence he has. Because honestly, there's no way that Mihawk is surviving a Buster Call, at least not easily. And in addition to that, Kizaru can also revoke a Shichibukai's status at any time, which means that if Mihawk does want to keep his connection to the world government, he has to somewhat get along with Kizaru. So in that case, Kizaru has Mihawk's hands tied. Additionally, other characters on this list do have equal ground in terms of allies if we look at the numbers, such as Doflamingo, Luffy, Cracker, and even Jack. But Kizaru also has something that the rest of them do not, which is the ability to initiate a Buster Call. And although Luffy survived one before, he wouldn't really have it easy the next time. Jack has already fallen when faced with multiple strong Marines, so he would be toast. Whether or not he would actually be killed is another story. And Doflamingo does have a lot of influence just like Kizaru, because of his equal rights agreement with the Celestial Dragons. So I would put these two on equal grounds in terms of allies. And with Cracker, since we don't know just how massive Big Mom's crew is, along with her powerful allies, we can't say for sure if she would be even, worse, or better off in terms of influence and allies. So for now, we'll put Cracker's connections on par with Kizaru, because there are very few powers that can beat the power or match the power of the world government. And right now, those would be the Yonko. So because of all that, I believe that Kizaru is the third strongest character in One Piece. Number 2. Sakazuki. Physically, Sakazuki is the definition of a superhuman, or maybe a better term would be a monster. In terms of his strength, it is unimaginable. Not only did he show us time and time again throughout the Marineford War that he was strong enough to take out enemy after enemy, but another testament of his strength would be the fact that he was able to stop Whitebeard's Bisento with just one leg. Which also keep in mind that Whitebeard was considered the strongest man in the world at that point in time. So the fact that Sakazuki could stop his weapon was a real accomplishment. Additionally, another testament to his strength could be the fact that he was able to battle with Kuzon for 10 whole days on an island in a fight to the death, and came out victorious. Another amazing physical trait would be his stamina. Not only was he able to fight enemy after enemy throughout the entire Marineford War without getting tired or worn down at all, but he was also able to constantly fight for 10 whole days against Kuzon like we just stated. So the fact he was able to continue fighting for that long means his stamina must be off the charts. Also, just like Kuzon and Kizaru, Sakazuki has very good hearing as he was able to hear activity underwater before the war began. And finally, Sakazuki has what I would say is the best durability we've seen so far in the series. This is evident by the fact that he was able to take 2 point-blank quake blows from Whitebeard, and even after all of that, he was still able to get back up and fight. And to put into perspective how strong these Quake abilities are, one of them was powerful enough to split Marineford in half. So even with all that power being forced down Sakazuki's throat, he still managed to get back up and fight. So if you ask me, it seems as if there's no stopping this man. Next up is his intelligence. And let me just say that Sakazuki is a very, very intelligent man. And much like Cracker, he is also very good in the art of deception. Except Sakazuki deceives his enemies in a different way, which is manipulation. What Sakazuki does is use the knowledge he has about his opponents to manipulate them into doing his bidding. For instance, he deceived Squard into thinking that Whitebeard had betrayed him, in turn leading Squard to attempt to kill Whitebeard. Then we saw this manipulation once again when he insulted Whitebeard, knowing that Ace would take the bait and try and attack him instead of trying to escape, which ended up resulting in Ace's death. Because Sakazuki aimed his attack at Luffy instead of Ace, knowing that Ace would jump in to save him. So as you can see, he knows how to get into people's heads to make them do exactly what he wants. So when it comes to a battle of intelligence, there are very few people who would be able to resist his manipulation, giving Sakazuki a huge edge. In terms of hockey, Sakazuki has some of the best hockey abilities we've seen. Or at least if it was hockey he was using. At the very least, we know that he can use armament hockey, as he used it with the other admirals to make a shield. But something that stands out to me that truly makes this man a monster is the fact that he was hit with 2 different hockey attacks at once from both Marco and Vista. But even though Marco and Vista are some very powerful characters, in fact Marco even made it on this list, but even aside from that, neither of their attacks were able to bypass his intangibility, let alone even hurt him at all. And Sakazuki himself even commented that hockey attacks were irritating. And that's exactly all those attacks did, was irritate him. So from this we can either assume 2 things. Either A, Sakazuki's hockey is so far beyond what we can imagine that he is able to take on hockey attacks that only result in mild irritation. Or B, it has nothing to do with hockey and he is just on a whole different level of power. For the sake of things making sense, I would like to say it's just that his hockey is otherworldly. But I also believe this could be just because he is so strong. But even if that wasn't his hockey, you need to keep in mind that because he is now Fleet Admiral and above the rank of Vice Admiral, he is automatically capable of using hockey. And considering that he is such a high rank, it can only be inferred that his hockey abilities are off the charts and he is capable of a lot more than what we got to see at Marineford like the other admirals in that battle. So because of that, I believe that Sakazuki has the strongest hockey on this list so far. But if for some reason that turns out to be untrue when we get to see his hockey abilities in the series later on, I will take back that statement. Next up is his Devil Fruit, which is the Magu Magu no Mi, otherwise known as the Mag Mag Fruit. This Devil Fruit is a Logia type and allows the user to create, control, and transform into magma at will, turning the user into a magma human. The main thing Sakazuki uses this fruit for is to create magma that he can use to attack his opponents with. This magma in question is hot enough to melt large icebergs instantly, and boil seawater when the two come in contact. Additionally, the magma is so hot that when Sakazuki uses an attack, nearby weapons of his comrades were shown to melt, and he is able to melt solid earth and rock easily. Because this fruit is a Logia, he can let attacks pass through him as long as they are not imbued with Haki. But as we said earlier, it seems as though even Haki is not enough to pass this intangibility. Additionally, if someone were to use a physical attack against Sakazuki, such as a punch, and he let it pass through him, his magma would in turn melt that person's arm. So having this magma ability also serves as the ultimate defense, as it makes it much harder to hit him without risking your life. This fruit was also able to turn half of an island into a constant blazing inferno, after being used consecutively for 10 whole days. When compared to the Mera Mera no Mi, this fruit is currently regarded as the superior of the two, as the magma abilities were enough to overpower the fire and in turn kill Ace, who was the user. And finally, this fruit also allows Sakazuki to travel at extremely high speeds by launching himself into the air like an actual volcano. Some of the techniques Sakazuki uses with this fruit are Daifunka, which is where he transforms his fists into pure lava before throwing it at his enemies. This attack also causes an explosion of volcanic rock and magma that will melt almost anything it touches. Ryusei Kazan, which is basically where Sakazuki fires a ton of flaming fists, like his previous technique, into the air, resulting in a mixture between a volcanic eruption of flaming magma fists flying all over the place, and a ton of small meteors flying down from the sky. This attack causes massive damage to the surrounding area, and was used to destroy the ice-covered battlefield along with everyone standing on it. And it also boiled the water beneath, leading to anybody who fell in getting severely burned. Inugami Gurin, which is a wave of magma shaped like a dog's head that Sakazuki sends flying at his opponent. And finally, Mago, which is where Sakazuki covers his arm with magma and his hand transforms into what appears to be a magma claw. He then lunges at his opponent, causing massive damage if it hits them. For instance, this attack was enough to burn off a big chunk of Whitebeard's head with only a glancing blow. Now let's put that into perspective for a second. This attack was enough to take off part of the strongest man in the world's head. That alone shows just how powerful this Devil Fruit ability is. And although it is not quite as useful as Marco's Devil Fruit or Kizaru's, it is by far one of the most powerful fruits we've seen in the series, giving Sakazuki one of the most dangerous abilities. Now finally onto his connections. Sakazuki's main and most notable connection is the world government and the Marines. Because Sakazuki has such a high role within the world government, he himself holds a great deal of power. Being the fleet admiral, he is in command of all the Marines. He is also able to issue a buster call, which I won't go over what that is since we just talked about it. So basically, Sakazuki is in charge of an entire army. Additionally, he also directly speaks with the Gorosei, which are the most powerful force in the world government, meaning Sakazuki also has high influence. Additionally, he also has control of all the current Shichibukai, meaning that they are also under his command should he summon them, although he does not trust them one bit. It has also been stated by Jinbei that since Sakazuki became the fleet admiral, the organization has become much stronger than before. This is likely because Sakazuki is all about absolute justice, doing anything he needs to achieve that, no matter what it may be. He also considers Marines who desert their post a traitor, and those who do not fight for absolute justice should not be called a Marine. So Sakazuki has no doubt sent this ideology throughout the entire system, strengthening them along with it. Other than this, Sakazuki does not have any notable allies, but considering that he is the fleet admiral, he has all the vice admirals and the admirals Kizaru, Isho, and Green Bull at his command, meaning he has some of the most powerful characters under his command. So honestly, Sakazuki doesn't need any other allies to be one of the strongest in the series. So what do I think of his abilities and how does he compare with the other characters on this list? Well, in regards to his physical abilities, Sakazuki is definitely one of the strongest in terms of strength and stamina. But even if those weren't enough for him to be considered a powerhouse, he has the strongest durability we've seen so far in the series. And I forgot to mention it before, but in terms of regular speed, he is definitely above average, but nothing overly special. However, what he lacks in physical speed, he can make up with the speed caused from his magma when he shoots himself in the air, making him travel very, very fast. So how does his physical abilities compare to others on this list? Well, in terms of strength, I would like to say he matches well with Jack. I would still say that Jack is stronger in terms of raw strength, but that's the closest comparison I can see. For stamina, Sakazuki has proven to take the cake, since he was able to fight for 10 whole days without stopping against Kuzon, in addition winning the fight. So although Kuzon was our previous winner for stamina, Sakazuki has stole the title. And when it comes to durability, he so far beats every other character on this list. So although he is lacking in physical speed, he isn't slow by any means like Jack either. So because of all that, I would say Sakazuki is physically the most well-rounded character so far. Moving on to his intelligence, Sakazuki is a master in manipulation and deception, and he has proven himself smart enough to lead the Marines and defeat his enemies. I would rank his intelligence above Cracker, but below or equal to Doflamingo and Mihawk in comparison. Although something Sakazuki can do that the others can't is easily get under their skin, which, as we've seen with Doflamingo, that is not very hard to do. All Sakazuki would need to do is insult a member of Doflamingo's family, and Sakazuki would already have Doflamingo's wrath. For Mihawk, I feel like the two are around the same level, because Mihawk would be able to see right through what Sakazuki is trying to do and not fall for his trap. but who knows what else he has up his sleeve. So in terms of intelligence, he may not be the smartest character in the series, but he is one of the top 3 at least in terms of intelligence on this list. Next up is Haki. And like I said before, either he has the best Haki we've seen so far, or it would be around the same level as someone like Cracker. So just from that simple comparison right there, we know that his Haki is at the very least tied with the strongest sense of armament Haki we've seen so far. However, since he does not have access to the other 2 types, he does fall a bit shorter, because he lacks variety to a character like Luffy who has access to all 3. His Devil Fruit is by far one of the strongest and deadliest in the series, just by its destructive power alone. The only 2 Devil Fruits we've talked about that compare to it would be Kizaru's Devil Fruit and Marco's Devil Fruit. Now, I do think Sakazuki's fruit is not superior to either of these fruits, but it does have a lot of useful qualities these fruits do not. For instance, when someone were to hit Kizaru without Haki and have their attack pass right through him, nothing happens. Unless you low-key get skin cancer or something like that. Whereas if they did the same to Sakazuki, they would lose whatever they hit him with because the magma would melt it. So if they used a sword, say goodbye to that. If they used a leg, RIP your leg. So Sakazuki's defense also becomes a great offense. However, Kizaru's fruit also has many destructive properties similar to Sakazuki's in terms of its explosive power with his lasers. These lasers may not cause as much damage as Sakazuki's magma, but they sure do travel a lot faster. So when I compare these 2 fruits, I feel that Sakazuki's fruit has a lot more destructive power behind it that also comes with a useful defense that is also an offense, whereas Kizaru's makes him the fastest man alive, which in turn can lead to some devastating quick attacks that Sakazuki would never see coming. So I would consider these fruits equals in terms of how useful and strong they are, but I will be giving Kizaru's Devil Fruit the win because of how scary his fruit can truly be if he decides to go all out with that speed and destructive power. Now, in comparison to Marco's fruit, the 2 are also at a bit of a stalemate, because Sakazuki's magma has been shown unable to penetrate Marco's flames, meaning that the 2 cancel each other out. But of course, Marco also has his regeneration, and Sakazuki has his destructive power. Marco can fly, Sakazuki can erupt. Marco can let attacks pass through him, and so can Sakazuki. So really, they each have a lot of benefits, but in my opinion, even though they both have a lot of positives and equal ground, I would still give the edge to Marco's fruit, because his fruit allows him to do so much aside from the destruction aspect, including constantly healing his wounds through regeneration, which is honestly something I think very few fruits will ever be able to compare to. So although Sakazuki's Devil Fruit beats out a lot of others on this list, I still wouldn't consider it the best. However, it is the best in terms of destructive capabilities. And since he has basically all of the allies Kizaru has, including Kizaru for that matter, my opinion remains the exact same for what I said for Kizaru. Although Sakazuki can also directly communicate with the Gorosei, so he's got that going for him. So in conclusion, Sakazuki has one of the most powerful connections in the world, but so do other characters like Doflamingo and Cracker. And because we don't know exactly what Cracker's massive amount of allies consist of, we will just consider them as equal, along with Doflamingo for the time being. So because of all that, I believe that Sakazuki is the second strongest character in One Piece. And the moment you've all been waiting for, number 1. The 4 Yonko, Marshall D. Teach or Blackbeard, Charlotte Linlin or Big Mom, Kaido of the Beasts, and red-haired Shanks. This one was probably pretty obvious since none of the Yonko have appeared on this list until now, other than mentions of how powerful they are. But our number 1 spot is actually shared with all 4 of them. And I do have a good reason for this. As of right now, we don't know a whole lot about some of these Yonko, which, because of my statement at the beginning of the video, I can't feature them on this list unless we have enough information about them and their abilities. But I decided to bend the rule a little bit. Considering we know a lot of information about some of the Yonko who were going to be on this list, I really didn't see the point in leaving the other Yonko off this list if they're all supposed to be just as powerful, if not more powerful. I am fully aware that each of the Yonko are not 100% equal in strength, and some are definitely weaker than others, but as of right now, each of them control the seas on somewhat equal grounds, being regarded as the strongest pirates on the sea. So because we don't know everything about each of the Yonko, I will be considering them all equal for the time being. So what I'm going to do is go over what we know about each Yonko, and then at the end I'm going to give my opinion and prediction on which Yonko I believe to be the strongest, in turn crowning the strongest character in One Piece. So let us begin with the Yonko we know the most about currently, which would be Marshall D. Teach, better known as Blackbeard. Physically, Blackbeard is a lot more impressive than I originally thought. His strength may not be the best on this list, but he is definitely incredibly strong. We've seen that Blackbeard possesses great strength, because he was able to punch both Luffy and Ace with such great force that they both flew a decent distance away. You could also tell by their reaction that that punch hurt like hell. It should also be noted that since Ace was a Logia user, Blackbeard's normal punches are able to hit him. This is however due to his Devil Fruit ability, which we will get to later. We've also seen that Blackbeard was able to injure Whitebeard with a few punches, and being able to injure the strongest man in the world is of course no easy task. We can also assume Blackbeard was very strong even before he ate his Devil Fruit, because he was once considered strong enough to be offered a commander position in Whitebeard's crew. And since we've seen how strong the other commanders are, the fact that Blackbeard was on their level without a Devil Fruit is definitely impressive. And another thing we should note is that the scar above Shanks' eye was caused by Blackbeard himself back when Shanks still had 2 arms. So there is probably a lot more to Blackbeard's strength that we just aren't aware of yet. But by far the most impressive part of Blackbeard physically has to be his monstrous endurance. A side note for this should be that Blackbeard's Devil Fruit allows him to absorb attacks, but if he fails to absorb it in time, he will still feel the full effect of whatever the attack was, and it will hurt him much more than it would a normal person, and do much more damage than normal as well, meaning he has to deal with a lot of pain whenever he fails to absorb an attack, which happens quite often. And to prove how incredible his endurance really is, Blackbeard has taken a number of monstrous attacks and came out alive, even with his increase of pain and damage. For instance, he has taken 2 different attacks from Whitebeard like a champ. The first attack was an indirect hit, and it really only seemed to annoy him rather than actually injure him. And then he also took a point-blank Quake Bubble attack to his head and neck while being pinned down. And although he was injured quite a bit from this attack, he didn't die or even pass out for that matter. He was also able to take a direct slash attack from Whitebeard's Bicento without any lasting damage. Additionally, he was also able to take a point-blank gear second attack from Luffy without getting hurt too badly, and even a hit from Sengoku in his Buddha form while only receiving minor injuries. So being able to tank all of those deadly attacks with increased damage and pain for that matter is definitely no easy task, showing us that Blackbeard's endurance really is something else. But unfortunately, we really don't know anything else about his physical capability, so we will be moving on to his intelligence. And although sometimes it may not seem like it, Blackbeard is a very smart man, and a very patient one at that. Blackbeard's intellect mainly lies inside of his own plans for personal gain, making sure to get every detail just right if possible. For instance, his main goal was to get his hands on the Yami Yami no Mi. So Blackbeard spent over 2 decades traveling with the Whitebeard pirates just to increase his chances of finding it, which of course, he eventually did, completing the first step of a plan he waited so long to accomplish. During his time with the Whitebeard pirates, Blackbeard also recruited the first members of his crew, showing that he also has great leadership of some sort, if he was capable of doing that while he was still just a crewmate. And Blackbeard also deliberately became a Shichibukai, so he could bypass the gates of justice and get into Impel Down just so he could recruit some of the most dangerous criminals from level 6, which he succeeded in doing. Through this plan, he even outsmarted the Gorosei, showing just how crafty of a plan he actually pulled off. Although he is very smart as you can see, he still does have a weakness he can't really help. which is the fact that he likes to talk a little bit too much during battle, which leads to him letting his guard down. So I wouldn't go as far as calling Blackbeard a genius, but he is definitely a pretty smart guy. Next up is Haki, which unfortunately we haven't seen Blackbeard use Haki at all. However, he has hinted to it before, suggesting that he does have some sort of Haki abilities. And being that he is a Yonko, it would be a little bit ridiculous if he didn't have Haki. So we'll just assume he does. But to what extent, we'll have to find out. Next up is his Devil Fruit. Or should I say, Devil Fruits? As I'm sure you all know, Blackbeard is in possession of the Yami Yami no Mi, otherwise known as the Dark Fruit. And after somehow taking it from Whitebeard's corpse, the Gura Gura no Mi, otherwise known as the Tremor Fruit. How Blackbeard was able to eat 2 devil fruits and live is so far unknown. But I personally think since the Yami Yami no Mi can absorb anything, I think it may have something to do with maybe absorbing the fruit, allowing Blackbeard to use its ability that way. Another interesting thing is that right now the Blackbeard pirates are in search of very powerful devil fruits and devil fruit users. For what purpose, you may ask? Well, we also don't know for sure, but I think they are more than likely after these fruits so that Blackbeard can somehow gain their powers as well, and just keep stocking up on useful abilities until he is absolutely untouchable. But even so, right now with the 2 devil fruits he does have, Blackbeard is already almost unstoppable. First, let's begin with the Yami Yami no Mi, which is a Logia-typed devil fruit that allows the user to create and control darkness at will, making the user a darkness human. And I'm only going to say this once before somebody attempts to correct me in the comments. This fruit is a Logia, not a Paramecia. So please, for the love of God, people, stop saying it's a Paramecia. One example I can give is the fact that this fruit can absorb things into its darkness, similar to how Caribou can absorb things into his swamp abilities, which is also a Logia type. Anyways, on to the explanation. Along with controlling darkness, it also allows the user to control the property of gravity that comes along with it. The darkness itself is like a void that devours and crushes everything it comes in contact with. And because of this, the user can absorb physical matter and attacks of any type by sucking it into the darkness he creates. When the user sucks something into the void, it's almost similar to a black hole. But unlike a black hole, it doesn't destroy whatever the darkness sucks in, but rather just damages it and then stores the contents of whatever it sucked up inside the empty void. We've seen this ability able to suck up a whole entire town, and even people for that matter. And Blackbeard can also spit up or regurgitate these items he sucked up out of the void and back into the world. And when he does, the town he sucked up, for instance, was pretty much destroyed, and the people he sucked up from Impel Down were still alive, but very heavily injured. The user can also use this ability to forcefully pull the opponent to them, kinda like the Force Pull in Star Wars, regardless of whatever they're doing. But the scariest ability of this fruit has to be the ability to nullify the powers of devil fruits just by simply touching the user, which drains them of their abilities as long as Blackbeard is touching them. This ability works on each type of devil fruit, and is most useful on Logia users, because touching them will take away their intangibility. It should also be noted that unlike Sea Prism Stone, which just prevents you from using the devil fruit abilities, this fruit completely takes the abilities away, as if the user never had them to begin with. Such as when Luffy no longer had the ability to stretch as soon as Blackbeard touched him, as if he was never a rubber man to begin with. This fruit may seem very overpowered, which it definitely is, but it does have a major weakness, which since the darkness also absorbs attacks, the user of the fruit is still vulnerable to any attacks, which do not pass through the darkness they turn into, and if the user fails to absorb an attack in time, the user can be hurt like any normal human being, or even much more according to Blackbeard. Now let's look at his signature techniques with this fruit, which are Black Hole, which is where Blackbeard spreads his darkness around a large area, and whatever is in this area is then subjected to large amounts of gravity and are slowly pushed into the void. Liberation, which is his follow-up technique to Black Hole, which is where he spits everything back up that he sucked into the void beforehand. And Kurozu, which is where Blackbeard uses his gravity power in conjunction with his arm to pull his opponent toward him, where Blackbeard can then grab them, nullify their ability, and attack them with his massive strength. So with everything we've learned about this fruit, I can safely say it is extremely powerful. Blackbeard himself has even stated that this devil fruit is the most powerful devil fruit out of them all, and I can definitely see why he would say that. But if that just wasn't enough, Blackbeard also has the Gura Gura no Mi, a paramecia devil fruit which allows the user to create vibrations similar to massive earthquakes, making the user a tremor human. This devil fruit was previously owned by Whitebeard, who was regarded as the strongest man in the world, and it has even been said that this particular devil fruit has the power to destroy the world. The main strength of this devil fruit is its ability to create or generate massive vibrations, or shockwaves, which can travel through pretty much any medium, including the ground, the seafloor, and even the air itself, causing massive amounts of destruction as the vibrations pass through. Through this destruction, it is a little too easy for this devil fruit to destroy entire islands at a time. However, these vibrations can be stopped if they come in contact with something strong enough to suppress them. This devil fruit also does have one weakness, which is that its attacks do not discriminate, meaning that whether you are friend or foe, you are not safe from these vibrations. Now that Blackbeard is the owner of this devil fruit, he can use all the abilities Whitebeard once had. So we will go over those now. But before that, I just want to add that at first Blackbeard had not yet mastered the devil fruit when he first got it, of course. But now with a 2-year time skip, he has without a doubt managed to at least perfect most of these techniques. Anyway, the first one is called Kaishin, which is where the user cracks the air with a punch that sends devastating shockwaves through the air in the direction it is facing. These shockwaves can pass through and damage almost any substance, completely tearing it apart. And if these shockwaves are directed into the ground, the attack will result in a devastating earthquake capable of generating huge tsunamis or worse if the user is not near water. This attack also doubles as an excellent defense because it will destroy or disrupt any attacks that are coming towards the user. Gekishin, which is basically a close-range version of the previous attack that sends these vibrations into one point-blank attack that transfers the destructive vibrations to whoever or whatever the user strikes, leading to massive damage. Kabuto Wari, which is where Whitebeard creates a small spherical area of energy with his hand to create a concentrated, explosive, and powerful blow to whatever is inside that spherical area. And finally, Shima Yurashi, which is where the user grabs and pulls the air around him and shifts it into many different directions, which led to Marineford tilting on its side and causing massive amount of destruction in the process. So not only does Blackbeard have the Yami Yami no Mi, but he also has this powerhouse of an ability too. So needless to say, his most notable feature is his Devil Fruit abilities. And it should also be noted that with these abilities, he was able to defeat the Whitebeard pirates at some point during the time skip. So these abilities are not something you want to challenge. And finally, onto his connections. Really, the only notable connections we know of right now is Blackbeard's crew, which is full of some very scary and powerful individuals. But Blackbeard really doesn't have any big organizations on his side that we know of, at least, giving him a bit of a downfall compared to some of the others who have very powerful connections. However, Blackbeard also has Kuzon as some sort of ally. And considering Kuzon was previously an admiral, not only is he strong enough to make it on this list himself, but he also has knowledge from his time in the Marines that Blackbeard could definitely use to his advantage should he need to. So Blackbeard does have one useful ally if nothing else. But that pretty much does it for Blackbeard, so let's move on to the next Yonko we know about, which is Charlotte Linlin, better known as Big Mom. Let me just begin by saying we know a decent amount about Big Mom, but nowhere near as much as we know about Blackbeard, so there will be some missing information. But to begin with her physical abilities, considering that Big Mom is a Yonko, it is no surprise that she is quite physically strong. For instance, she is able to throw punches that pack some real destructive power. She can climb tall buildings easily, and throw her servants a great distance with only one arm. Another notable instance of her strength would be that she was able to break through a metal door just by walking through it, which doesn't really sound impressive. But Smoothie, who is one of Big Mom's sweet commanders and probably one of the strongest on her crew, was unable to previously break through that same metal door. Unfortunately, other than her strength, we don't know much else about Big Mom's physical abilities. So next, let's talk about her intelligence. And really not much is known about just how smart she is, because we've seen two different sides to Big Mom. We've seen the side where she seems rather intelligent, more or less acting like a businesswoman, businesswoman in the way she sets up marriages and alliances with other crews and organizations, ultimately just trying to get what she wants and strengthen her own crew. And then we have her other side, which is quite terrifying. This side occurs when Big Mom gets fixated on a particular type of food or sweet, and will completely rampage until she gets the food she craves, going as far to destroy and kill entire countries, her own castle, her own subordinates, and even her own children. So it's honestly hard for me to gauge just how smart she really is at this point in time, especially with such a dangerous eating disorder. So for now, we'll just say she's moderately intelligent. Next up is Haki, which we have no clue if Big Mom can use any form of Haki at this point in time. Although considering she is a Yonko, I would imagine she possesses at least one of the three, and is very proficient when using it. But again, we can't know for sure until we see it. Next up is her devil fruit, which is the Soru Soru no Mi, otherwise known as the Soul fruit. This devil fruit is a paramecia type and allows the user to freely interact with and manipulate human souls. This soul manipulation consists of drawing out and manifesting fragments of a human soul into a somewhat ghostly, light-colored substance, which the user extracts by grabbing the substance that appears to surround the body and pulling it out. This extraction of the person's soul is effectively the same thing as taking away a fraction of their lifespan, and the amount of life taken is decided by the user. The maximum amount we have seen so far has been 50 years from Pedro, although Big Mom was going to take away 60 years from Pedro instead, so it is likely she can take away even more than that. And Big Mom can even take so little as just a second of life if desired. Because of this ability, it is possible for Big Mom to kill her victim instantly, by taking more life away than the person in question has left. So far from what we've seen, this extraction process does not appear to hurt the victim, but this is also only for small amounts of the victim's life, and a greater amount could inflict quite a bit of pain, but we don't know for sure. Another thing that should be mentioned is that the emotions of the victim affect how easy it is for Big Mom to extract their soul. We don't know a lot about this stipulation, but we do know that when a victim is showing fear, it makes it much easier for Big Mom to extract their soul. Well, now you might be asking, well, what does Big Mom do with the soul fragments she extracts? Does she eat them or something? Well, no. What she does instead is sprinkle these fragments all over the islands of Toto Land, where they settle into random objects or animals to turn them into homies. So basically, these soul fragments can give life to inanimate objects, and give animals a more human appearance and behavior. Kind of like Chopper in a sense, but not quite to the same extent. These homies can fight if needed, but they do have two weaknesses. The first is fear, because if a homie experiences extreme amounts of fear, they will instantly die. And their other weakness is a Viviri card of Big Mom, because they can sense her powerful soul emanating from it, and therefore will not attack whoever has it. Big Mom herself can also create these things called incarnations, which are these large, black, ghostly looking creatures created from Big Mom's own soul. And the incarnations themselves are able to extract souls. These incarnations are also capable of human speech and able to understand basic orders. Big Mom herself also has the ability to create or summon two particular homies at will, named Zeus and Prometheus, which are a thundercloud and a miniature sun. They will appear whenever she summons them, and with them she can manipulate the weather to create destructive storms as a manifestation of her rage, which is noted to be unstoppable. And that is currently everything we know about her devil fruit, which is a very scary ability if you ask me. I'm sure there will end up being a lot more this fruit can do, but for now, this is what we're left with. And finally, let's talk about Big Mom's connections, which first let's talk about her children. As far as we know, Big Mom has 84 children in total, and really her only reason for having so many children is to strengthen her crew, and to marry them to whomever she chooses to create new alliances and overall make her crew even stronger. Some of her children, such as Cracker, just happen to also double as one of the most powerful characters in One Piece so far. and she has at least 2 more children who are on that exact same level. Additionally, many of her children are generally strong fighters, or have some sort of ability, meaning that just her family alone is a force to be feared. But aside from her family, we also have her subordinates or other crew members. One of Big Mom's goals is to create a nation where all the races live in harmony. So as you can guess, she also obtains some interesting crew members from other races. For instance, Tamago and Peckham's are both members of her crew who are from different races. Peckham's being a mink and Tamago being a member of the Long Leg tribe. In addition to that, since Big Mom marries her children to form a family connection with other crews and organizations, she ends up making a lot of new and powerful connections along the way. One instance of this would be her alliance with the Sun Pirates or Fishman Pirates, by marrying her daughter Praline to Aladdin, to form that family connection, and to protect Fishman Island since the fall of the former Yonko Whitebeard. This alliance also allied her with Jinbei, meaning that he is also currently a member of her crew. Another good example would be her alliance with Capone Beji, who formed the family connection by marrying Chiffon. So now Capone works under Big Mom. It should also be noted that if someone ever wants to sever ties with Big Mom, they need to give up something important to them in return, such as a limb. And Big Mom uses a roulette to decide what the severity of the important thing may be. So as you can imagine by how many children Big Mom has, it is without a doubt that she has some very powerful allies we have yet to see, meaning that she could potentially have the most powerful crew in the world. Another thing that should be mentioned is her relationship with the countries or civilizations she protects. Big Mom only protects them as long as they can pay some sort of cost to her, usually in candy or some other sweet. And if they fail to pay, she will not only revoke her protection, but also destroy the area in question. So through this, Big Mom could also be getting a lot of useful goods in addition to her sweet candy. Now that about does it for the allies we know about, but I think what makes Big Mom so powerful is definitely her connections, because Big Mom just has potentially so many, and from those that we've seen already, we can tell that her allies are some very powerful people, and you should definitely think twice before starting anything with this Yonko. But that about does it for what we know about Big Mom, and unfortunately the other 2 Yonko we know very little about in terms of their abilities, but I will make sure to relay whatever information we do know. So next up, we are going to be looking at the strongest creature in the world, Kaido of the Beasts. Let us begin with his physical abilities. Kaido has been caught and tortured 18 times. The Marines and other Yonko have attempted to execute him 40 times, but each time he survived, because the execution weapons broke when used on him. He has jumped from over 10,000 meters in the sky onto the ground in an attempt to kill himself, creating such a massive shockwave that it sunk ships nearby. And from that fall, all he got was a little headache. Kaido's most notable physical ability, if it is physical, is his inability to die. As you can see, there have been numerous attempts to kill him, each one resulting in failure. And Kaido has also attempted to kill himself multiple times, each time also resulting in failure. So it's pretty much impossible to kill him apparently. Kaido also has massive physical strength from what we've seen, as he was able to easily hit a normal-sized person with his weapon and send them flying far off into the distance. And it has also been said that he has sunk 9 gigantic prison ships single-handedly. But other than all that, we know nothing else regarding his physical abilities. But just from what we've heard, I think it's safe to say he will probably end up easily being one of the physically strongest, if not the physically strongest. Next up is his intelligence, which we really know nothing about, so there's not much to comment on. But I personally feel like Kaido is going to end up being the least intelligent of the 4 Yonko, and if he isn't, I would be very surprised. Next up is his ability to use Haki, which, you guessed it, we have no idea if Kaido can use Haki. However, since he is a Yonko, he likely can, but we'll have to see if he can and to what extent. Next up is his Devil Fruit, or lack of, because we have no idea if Kaido has a Devil Fruit or not at this point in time. So once again, we'll need to wait and see. And finally, let's move on to his notable connections, which we do know something about. First up is his crew, which is made up of a lot of powerful individuals. First are what he calls pleasures, which are basically your normal throwaway pirates with nothing special about them. Then we have the gifters, which are members of his crew that have eaten the artificial devil fruits called smiles, making them beastmen. It should also be noted that Kaido's dream is to create the strongest crew the world has ever seen by composing it of nothing but devil fruit users. So these gifters are superior in strength to the pleasures. And then after that we have the three disasters, which are Kaido's strongest members and his right-hand men. The only one we know about currently is Jack, who is strong enough on his own to make it on this list, so I can only imagine what the other two are like. In addition to his crew, Kaido also has his allies and subordinates. The first we'll mention is Doflamingo and Caesar Clown. They were in charge of getting Kaido his smiles, and although Doflamingo and Caesar were defeated and the smile production was stopped, Kaido still considers at the very least Doflamingo an ally, as he sent Jack to rescue him. And like we talked about earlier, Doflamingo is also on this list, meaning that so far Kaido has two of the strongest allies in One Piece, even though he considers Doflamingo rather weak. Next up is X-Drake and his crew, who are currently allied with Kaido and work under him. Then we have Scratchman Apu, who is allied with Kaido as of now from what we saw. And finally we have the Shogun of Wano Country, who we do not know much about, but we can assume they are a very powerful or at least very influential ally to have. So although Kaido does not have a huge amount of connections like Big Mom does, he still has some of the most powerful allies in One Piece, making him an even greater force to be reckoned with. But that is pretty much all we know about Kaido currently in regards to his power. So let's move on to the last Yonko, which is none other than red-haired Shanks. Now, unfortunately, Shanks is currently the most mysterious member of the Yonko, so he is the one we currently know the least about, at least in terms of his own abilities. So when it comes to his physical abilities, all we know is that he is a swordsman, he was able to block a magma punch from Sakazuki, and he used to have legendary duels with Mihawk back in the day when he had two arms. Other than that, we know nothing else about his physical capabilities. But considering he is a Yonko and each of the other Yonko are very strong and well-rounded physically, we can assume the same for Shanks. Moving on to his intelligence, we don't know much about that either. And all we really know is that he is very good when it comes to his skills with diplomacy, as he was able to convince Sengoku to agree to his proposition. Also, Kaido was on his way to kill Whitebeard before they made it to Marineford, but we learned that Shanks managed to intercept Kaido and stop him from coming. So either A, the Red Hair Pirates defeated Kaido easily because they showed no signs of being injured from any previous battle when they arrived, or B, Shanks managed to persuade Kaido not to attack. What ended up actually happening is still a mystery. So from his ability to deal with things like this, I assume that Shanks is definitely rather intelligent. Maybe not as intelligent as someone like Doflamingo or Mihawk, but I would place his intelligence above Blackbeard if I had to guess how smart Shanks really was. But we'll just have to wait and find out. Next up is Shanks' ability to use Haki, which from what we've seen so far, Shanks can use both Conqueror's Haki and Armament Haki. His Conqueror's Haki is also extremely powerful, as it was able to easily knock out tons of Whitebeard's crew members. Additionally, in an SBS, Oda has stated that Shanks' Haki is so powerful that he could have knocked out all 100,000 of the men and fishmen back during the Fishman Island arc. So from that, we can see that his Haki is still much stronger than Luffy's. He also used Armament Haki to stop Sakazuki's attack with his sword. So from this we can assume that his Haki must be something else, because other Haki attacks didn't even phase Sakazuki in the slightest. So from what we know right now, I would be willing to bet that Shanks currently has the strongest Haki in the series. But again, we cannot know for sure. Finally, onto his devil fruit, or lack of. We know almost for certain that Shanks did not have a devil fruit at the beginning of the series, because he was able to swim. However, it is certainly possible that Shanks did eat one at some point after that. A lot of people have some pretty interesting theories about it, but we really can't know for sure if he actually has eaten one or not. So again, I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. Now finally, onto his connections. We don't know much about his connections other than the connection he has with his own crew. We know that he is also friends friends with Luffy, but the two will likely not meet each other again for quite some time. Shanks used to be rivals with Mihawk, but since he lost his arm, it seems as though the two are just mere acquaintances, but on good terms. And finally, the last connection we are aware of that is notable would be his connection with Marco. The two were once enemies, but now seem to be allies after Marco gave an apology and his gratitude to Shanks. Although what their relationship is as of now is unknown. It should also be noted that Shanks was once a member of Gold D. Roger's crew, and I would say this is a very significant connection, but other than Buggy and Silver's Rayleigh, we really don't know anybody else who is in Roger's crew. And we also don't know what Shanks' relationship is with them now. So compared to some of the other Yonko, it seems as though Shanks' connections fall a bit short. But at the same time, I'm sure there's a lot more notable allies that we just don't know about. And if not, there must be some reason Shanks doesn't have very many. Either way, I'm sure we will find out later on. But that does it for Shanks. So out of the 4 Yonko, which one do I think will end up being the strongest? So honestly, at this moment in time, it's very hard to judge which Yonko will be the strongest due to the lack of information. But as of right now, it seems as though each Yonko has a certain quality that is vastly superior to the rest. Physically, I feel like Kaido will end up being the strongest because of his history and just his overall size and appearance. We know that Kaido has had quite the history with people attempting to kill him, and even Kaido attempting to kill himself, all which have failed. So either this has something to do with his devil fruit if he has one, or he is just that physically invincible, which seems to be more likely. So when it comes to physical abilities, I believe Kaido is the strongest. In terms of intelligence, I feel like each of the Yonko are at the very least moderately intelligent, except for maybe Kaido. But honestly, right now the smartest Yonko appears to be Blackbeard or Shanks. I feel like Big Mom is close to their level of intelligence, but she's just not quite that smart. Of course, we don't know a lot about Shanks' intelligence, but it's also hard for me to imagine him not being intelligent, so I may just be biased in that case. But if we take Shanks out of the question, it looks as though Blackbeard is currently the smartest Yonko, which is absolutely crazy to me because Blackbeard doesn't really seem that smart until you learn about his master plans and how he orchestrates them. So as of right now, I would say that Shanks and Blackbeard are both even in terms of intelligence. Next up is Haki, which as of right now, Shanks is on top, mainly because we don't know what the other Yonkos are capable of in terms of Haki. But as of right now, we know that Shanks can use 2 of the 3 types, and one of those 2 is Conqueror's Haki. In addition to that, Oda has basically confirmed in his SBS that Shanks' Haki is strong enough to take out 100,000 people at once, meaning that his Haki is the strongest in the series so far. There is a good chance that the other 3 Yonko could have stronger Haki, or at least stronger armament Haki, but for now, Shanks has the strongest Haki. Moving on to Devil Fruits, it's impossible not to pick Blackbeard, purely because he has access to 2 Devil Fruits unlike every other character. But in addition to that, they are 2 of the strongest Devil Fruits in the series, making Blackbeard an unstoppable force just in that instance. On top of that, it is likely Blackbeard will find a way to gain even more Devil Fruit abilities, since he is looking for them. So I think we can expect to see Blackbeard get much stronger later on in the series. But for now, his Devil Fruits make him superior to the rest. And finally, onto connections. I have to give this one to Big Mom for her massive crew and massive set of allies. Compared to the other Yonko in terms of connections, Kaido is the only one that compares at all. But even his crew looks tiny when you compare it to Big Mom's. Kaido may potentially have the stronger crew, but if Big Mom has a crew and set of allies close in strength, but with greater numbers, even Kaido will be toast. So because of her massive set of connections, Big Mom takes the cake. And eats it too. So now onto who I believe is the strongest. Before I begin, I want to say that this is a very, very tough choice for me to make, because each of them have some sort of superior quality. So what brings me to this conclusion is the fact that both Shanks and Blackbeard have 2 qualities each, while the others only have 1. So for now, I'm going to say Kaido and Big Mom are the weaker of the 2 overall, which is really hard for me to say because I feel that both of them are such powerful characters. But now we have Blackbeard and Shanks. Now, personally, as the series stands right now, I believe Blackbeard is the stronger character, or at least has the potential to be the stronger character, if he can continue to consume Devil Fruit after Devil Fruit, gaining a whole arsenal of powerful abilities. But even if Blackbeard becomes the strongest character, I feel like he will never be on the same level as Shanks, because I feel Shanks is going to be the character at the end of the series that Luffy needs to surpass, and to surpass Shanks, Luffy will need to become the strongest character. So I feel like Shanks also has that plot armor we all know and love. But I could also be completely wrong, and Shanks could die in the next arc. So if I honestly had to choose the strongest character in One Piece, it would be Shanks. And I honestly hate to say that because we know so little about him, but that is just a prediction, not the actual strongest character according to this list. Like I said earlier, until we know everything about each Yonko, I am ranking them all as equals. So as of right now, the strongest character in One Piece is a four-way tie between Kaido, Big Mom, Blackbeard, and Shanks. But if I had to put my money on one character coming out on top, it's going to be Shanks. But there you have it, everybody, the top 10 strongest characters in One Piece. Or the top 13 if you want to be specific. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video today, and if you did, make sure to drop a like on this video, because if this video gets 10,000 likes, I will make the next One Piece top 10, which I am currently not sure what the topic will be about, but I've got some great ideas in mind. And I just want to say it will probably be a little while until the next One Piece top 10, unless those likes are out of control. But even if it will be a while, it will definitely be much sooner than the gap between this video and the last one. So just be patient, guys. Hopefully you guys agree with the characters on this list, at least with the qualifications I put in place. But if you didn't agree, make sure to tell me in the comment section down below who your top 10 strongest One Piece characters would be. In addition to that, this video has taken over a month to make, so if you guys could leave a like and subscribe, I would just really fucking appreciate it in general. So seriously guys, thank you in advance. Also, recently YouTube has been fucking content creators really hard when it comes to their views, as I'm sure most of you know. Although it's been getting a little bit better, make sure to hit that notification bell down there to make sure you can be notified whenever I upload a new video. If you guys could take a few seconds to do that, I would really appreciate it. So thank you in advance once again. If you are new to this channel and you enjoyed this video, also make sure to subscribe. And while you're at it, make sure to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. But anyways guys, that's all I've got for you today. So if you cannot get enough too spooky content, well, why don't you click here for the top 10 Paramecia Devil Fruits in One Piece. And if that's not doing it for you, well, why don't you click here for 10 facts about Tony Chopper. But anyways guys, thank you all so much for watching this video today, and a special thank you if you've watched the whole thing, because this was definitely a long one. Well, thanks again everybody, and I will see you all soon with a new video.